Oh,
Hi, good evening, David. It's a long time ago I went to Glenmorangie. I think it's already almost 10 years ago. I visited the distillery.
okay, great. I'm glad you came to see us, though. So, yeah,
Yeah, it's a wonderful place, actually, Tain. I love the small village as well.
yes,
Always very nice people and a
it's a
good hotel with good food, actually, as
yeah,
well.
yeah. It's actually really improved, since the first time I went to Tain, when it was, back in like 2004. It was a very, very quiet place, and the hotels and restaurants were not very good. And it's still a quiet place, but they've now got a few good restaurants, and it's a beautiful place, that's for sure. Yeah.
It's I did it back then by train. I
Mm,
flew to Glasgow, and
yeah.
then I took the train to Tain, and that was I think almost a day traveling.
Yes.
It was,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
very long traveling in the train.
You probably had to change trains maybe twice, at least once, to do that.
Uh, Twice. I
Yeah.
Yes, it was twice. One in Perth and the second one in Inverness.
Inverness. Yep. Yeah, it's frustrating whenever I go back to Scotland, and I really want to take the train because, one, I'm tired from traveling. I don't want to drive it, and two, just environmentally better. But then I look at the train timetables, and every time I look, it's like, oh, I could I can fly across the Atlantic Ocean in less time than I can go from Edinburgh to Tain.
Yes, indeed, indeed.
It's not great.
But when you take the train, it's always a little bit of traveling. You don't know exactly when you have a train, when you come to your end station. It's always a fun thing.
I really I don't like that the connection in Perth. Growing up in Scotland, I have many memories of missing connections in Perth
Oh,
because the
really?
first train was delayed and getting stuck at Perth train station for hours and hours. So whenever I see a route that says connect in Perth, I'm like, no.
I can imagine. It's-
It seems to be a tradition that you get stuck in Perth. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh dear.
but you see so lovely places when you take the train.
It's true. The journey from, particularly the journey from Perth to Inverness, that train track is just amazing.
It's wonderful indeed.
Very remote and wild, especially if you do it, if you ever go in the winter. Sometimes you wonder, gosh, is the train going to make it? It's good fun. You have to excuse me because it's midday here where I am, so I'm drinking tea. Genuinely, it is tea. You can see it steaming. It's not whiskey.
So you aren't in Scotland then now?
No, no, I'm not. Normally in in before COVID and everything, I'd be just all over the world. But I've been based for a while now. I've been based in the US mainly because
Oh,
I married an American girl and I've got kids.
oh, okay.
It was a very it's been a very convenient base because I get back to Scotland, every other month. And then I'm traveling to Asia or Australia or wherever.
Mhm.
Um, and it's been really convenient. But obviously now I am like everybody else, grounded.
Yes,
Um,
indeed.
so it's a bit different. That's for sure. But hey, it's been better on my health and on the planet that I haven't been on a plane every other day. So there's that, I guess. I'm looking
So,
forward to getting back to Scotland. That's for sure. I miss my dad's still in Edinburgh, and I obviously haven't. We all haven't seen our parents for a long time, so it's yeah. I'm hoping to get back. Um, I have a trip booked for early September back to Scotland. We'll cross fingers and, you know, hope. Just who knows?
Let's hope so.
Yeah. But it seems like the vaccine rollout is just unbelievably slow everywhere. So who knows? Who knows? Yeah. You see my...
What kind of bottle is that you are now holding?
So yeah, this unfortunately is an empty bottle, the worst type. But this was the... I was going to talk about this in a bit because this was the first finished Glenmorangie ever, and therefore most probably the first finished Scotch whiskey ever.
Okay.
So released in 1987, 63 vintage.
You ever tasted that one?
Yes, I've had a chance from that very bottle. Actually, we did an event with it, so I got one glass. I got my glass out of that. So I was very fortunate to get a glass out of it.
Okay.
Delicious stuff, really. I wish I could taste it again. The cork has seen better days. Not doing so well. But I managed to pull together pretty much most of the range that you guys are tasting. I don't have the port cask, but I do have something that looks similar from a distance, a different single cask bottling. So I thought I'd just put it there instead.
Yeah, okay.
And pretend. But I think I've got a similar era 10-year-old, maybe slightly older actually, but ballpark the same. I have the Tacta, yeah. And we can talk about others as well. And of course, you know, we have our Ardbeg is part of the company too. So I spent a fair amount of time working on Ardbeg as well. So if we have questions about Ardbeg, more than happy to talk about those too. All my Ardbeg stuff back here now. The Glenmorangie's out the front.
Meanwhile, our group is getting bigger and bigger. We're almost there, I guess.
Cool.
13 participants.
Nice. Brilliant. So Björn, just let me know. You know, I'm in no particular rush, so I'm whatever time schedule you want to go by, I'm cool. I'm cool with.
I'm thinking and hoping that nobody of us has anything else to do this evening. So.
All right. I've just realized this microphone is throwing a lot of shadow on me. Hopefully, it's not too bad.
No, I think it's okay.
Probably need to rearrange my lighting at some point.
And it's on your good side as well.
I don't think I have a good side.
Well, maybe you should move the mic a little bit more.
My backside. I had it over here before, and then people said before they couldn't hear me because it was behind me, but I'll just leave it there. There we go. I don't know if this microphone is actually an improvement or not, but it makes me look, professional. That's all that matters.
The whole setup looks kind of professional.
Well, this is, my wife must love me, even though it seems like she doesn't quite a lot of the time. My last, in 2019, my last big sort of international trip, I went off on a trip to the Philippines and China, Hong Kong, all over. And I came back, and this room that we have where I had all my bottles of whiskey kind of on boxes, and my wife had got a guy who's a local guy who's a really talented joiner, I guess handyman, to come in and build this whole setup of like, looks like a kind of speakeasy. So that was incredibly kind of her. And then we were using it as a kind of just a party room. And then it was perfect for all the Zoom tastings as a backdrop. So,
so you knew Corona was coming, yeah?
Yeah, I think so.
Well prepared.
A couple of lights bought off Amazon and a microphone, and now I have a kind of an amateur studio set up, I guess. You know? Although I just realized this is actually squint. There we go. Oops. That's better. A bit better.
Would make more sense to turn the camera rather than the whole table, no?
I know, but I can't. The camera's too far away.
Right.
The camera, I've got it set up with my 4K camera on a tripod, but with a Microsoft Surface Pro in a kind of a clamp, so that I can see myself and see you guys. And then I have my wireless keyboard and mouse, so I can control it all from here. But I can't. It's way too far away to reach.
It's either the camera or the bottles that you have in reach, right?
Yes, and I put my bar on one of the first projects I did for COVID was I put the bar on coasters that can lock, so that I can move the bar wherever I want and have different setups. So, and for exactly this sort of thing where I need to get the bar as straight as possible. So, yeah.
I think we can start if you're ready. If other people might join, I'll keep on accepting them.
Okay, perfect. Bjorn, do you want to say a few words first, or do you want me to just get?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, cool, please.
I'll start in Dutch voor everybody. Goedenavond allemaal. Bedankt voor hier aanwezig te zijn op deze tweede Rocktailz whisky tasting. Deze keer hebben we gegaan voor een volledige Glenmorangie tasting. Een merk waar ik toch al lange tijd een voorliefde voor heb. Ik denk ook wel een beetje dat ik whisky ontmaagd ben door Glenmorangie samen met Aardbeg. De eerste fles die ik ooit kocht was een Aardbeg. En de tweede fles was een Glenmorangie, de original. Dus zo ben ik verder gegaan met het verzamelen en het verder proeven. En ik ben begonnen met de private edition en enkele andere soorten van Glenmorangie te verzamelen. En met deze gelegenheid wil ik toch een heel wat van die speciale bottelingen eens opentrekken. Als de flessen €100 of €300 en meer beginnen te waard te zijn, begint het wat pijnlijker te worden voor ze te durven opentrekken. En met deze tasting was het een ideale gelegenheid om dit te kunnen verdelen. Dus zo kunnen jullie allemaal meegenieten ervan. Als kaart op de taart hebben we ook nog de brandmanager of brandambassador van Glenmorangie, David Blackmore, kunnen uitnodigen om deze tasting grotendeels in goede banen te leiden en wat extra informatie over de flessen te kunnen verschaffen. Dus bij deze, I'll give the word to David Blackmore for now. Thank you very much for doing this tasting for us.
Of course. Thank you so much for inviting me. I know that I was really excited when it popped up in my Facebook feeds and we made contact. So what a great collection of Glenmorangie you guys have to taste today as well. I'm quite jealous, I have to say, especially of a couple of them. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Now, I'm hoping and that I kind of I'm expecting that most of you will be able to understand me and talking in English. I apologize, I don't speak Dutch, although I have fond memories of coming to the Netherlands when I was about 18 years old. And I did I'm going to ruin the pronunciation, the Nijmegen marches.
Oh, yes, yes.
I did that whole thing. I know that's not in Belgium, but there we go. So hopefully everyone can understand me okay. I see somebody, I recognize the face there, Eddie. I recognize that face for sure. On just arrived. So a man who knows a lot about Glenmorangie for sure.
Hello, David.
Hi, how are you? Nice to meet you. And we follow each other on Instagram and things.
Yep, we do.
Yeah.
I'm anxious to see what you're doing tonight.
Absolutely. So without further ado, I guess I'll give you a quick rundown of myself and what I do, and then we'll get straight into the tasting, because the whiskey always is the star of the show, of course. That's the way it should always be. So yeah, I've been with the Glenmorangie company for, gosh, well, I started my career in the whiskey industry with the Scotch Malt Whisky Society in Edinburgh, down at the Vaults, back in about 2002, and was having a great time there, and then was seconded down to the Scotch Malt Whisky Society venue in London. And it was during that period of time that the Glenmorangie company bought the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, and I by default became a Glenmorangie employee at some point then. And Whiskey Live London that year must have been 2003, I suspect, or 2004. I went along to my first ever whiskey festival, and before I made the mistake that most of us have made at our first whiskey festival, which is by getting completely hammered and being not very professional at all. Luckily, before that happened, I bumped into Dr. Bill Lumsden for the first time, and I got his business card off him. And for the next year, I called him one week and I emailed him the next, on and on and on, saying, I'd like a job directly working for you as a brand ambassador for Glenmorangie. So it took about a year, and finally a position in the US came up, and Bill said, right, come back up from London, interview. And his instructions to me were, just don't F up the interview and you've got the job. So I got the job, and to get rid of me and stop me calling him all the time, he banished me off to the US. So I arrived in the US on September 16th, 2005, one-way ticket to New York, not having a clue about the US, having only been to the US once for a few days in my entire life. So it's been a learning process for sure, but a great one. Along the line, since 2005, I have gained responsibilities for pretty much the rest of the world. Funnily enough, I haven't had responsibility for mainland Europe or the UK actually, but pretty much everywhere else. I've been sent off to Asia and to South America and all sorts of places, preaching the good word of Glenmorangie and Ardbeg. But anyway, that's my brief history of where I come from. And first and foremost, I come from a position of being, like you guys, a whiskey fan. I love my Scotch whiskies. I do not by any means just drink Glenmorangie and Ardbeg, as you can hopefully see behind me. There are plenty of Glenmorangies and Ardbegs, but there's lots of society whiskey over here, and you can't see what's behind the camera. That's where most of my kind of non-company products are sitting right now. So I'm a big whiskey fan, and I just happen to be employed by the brands that I really, really love, Glenmorangie and Ardbeg. A lucky man, that's for sure. Right, let's get stuck in, and we're going to start with a little bit about the Glenmorangie distillery itself, and then we'll get straight into tasting the first of the whiskies. Okay, Bjorn, does that sound good?
That's very good.
And of course, jump in at any time, and please do add if you'd like to. I'm going to now try and figure out how to share my screen. Right, share, and there. Hopefully you can see that. Do you also see the little thing of yourself or not?
Yes, we can see both the screen and ourselves.
I'm trying to figure out how to not have that there. But anyway, there it is. Right. We'll put it down there like that. So welcome to Glenmorangie, where we like to kind of say all tastes are possible. And that's really a quote coming straight from Bill Lumsden, because as you'll see, everything that we do, very much led by him as our creative kind of force, is all about creating interesting, new and exciting flavors. Then we can talk about all the other things that go around it, the stories, the marketing, the blah, blah, blah. But everything starts with, what is it going to taste like? How do we make a delicious whiskey? Because frankly, if you don't, our opinion is if you don't start there, then what's the point? You know, we're tasting these whiskeys to gain enjoyment from exciting and sometimes surprising flavors. So that should be the ultimate main focus of any whiskey maker. And it certainly is with Glenmorangie. Before we get into that anymore, though, for those of you that aren't so familiar with Glenmorangie, and I'm fully aware there are many people on here that have been to Glenmorangie on multiple occasions, and I apologize for this being kind of right back to basics. But the name Glenmorangie, you know, first of all, is massively mispronounced by almost everybody. And I mean almost everyone, even within the company, mispronounce it. So don't feel bad about that. Frankly, most of the native Scots Gaelic speakers from that area of Scotland where we are in the Northeast Highlands, you know, Scots Gaelic has largely died out. So who's to really know exactly how it should be pronounced? And then you layer over local accent and all the rest. But we believe it should be pronounced Glenmorangie with the kind of rolling R that you get in the Scots accent, Scots language, I guess. Glen, you know, lots of distilleries in Scotland have Glen in the name. And of course, it's because Glen means valley and we need water, surprise. And it tends to fall out of the sky a lot in Scotland and then run down into valleys. If you were to look at a map of Scotland, of course, you'd see lots of the word Glen on the map, but you'd also see a lot of the word M-O-R because more means big. And there are at least 2, maybe 3, I forget, mountains in Scotland called Ben More. And when you realize that Ben means mountain, big mountain, you know, we're not a very imaginative lot as a nation, really. 3 big mountains. And then Angie means peaceful or tranquil. So when I was a kid growing up in the late 80s, early 90s, I remember clearly the first TV ad for a single malt whiskey was a Glenmorangie TV ad. And the strapline at the end was, "Welcome to the Glen of Tranquility." So this idea of big peaceful valley comes from the name itself. Here's a shot of the Dornoch Firth looking out north over from Glenmorangie Distillery, looking north, I guess, or north and west a bit there, I guess. You just about be able to see Balblair behind the map inset, and off to the right would probably be Brora at Clynleash. But we're a pretty remote spot, right up in the very far northeast Highlands, north of Inverness, as we were talking about before we started. You know, if you're driving it from Inverness across the bridge there and into the Black Isle, probably 40 minutes drive, depending on whether you get stuck behind a Dutchman with a caravan, which used to be the thing in the summers in Scotland, or behind a tractor. If you're with Lumsden, it'll take you about 25 minutes and you'll be utterly terrified the whole way up that part of the drive. But anyway, so this time of year, you know, it's a pretty dark place. Sunrise 10-ish in the morning, sunset 3-something in the afternoon. You feel a bit like you're in a submarine. Go in the summer, and then the only issue there is make sure to bring an eye mask, because the worst thing in the world is waking up at 3 in the morning when the sun rises and you might have been just finishing the last of a few too many Glenmorangies at about 1 in the morning. Don't fall into that trap for sure. So Northeast Highlands, and there is a relatively recent photo of the Glenmorangie distillery. You know, and if you look at the label, it says founded in 1843. Must be true, right? Everything on a label is always true. And in reality, 1843 is just the year that this chap on the inset there, who not very handsome, is he? Looks like a bit of a thug to me, but there we are. William Matheson, our founding father, basically took out a license to legally distill in 1843. there's written evidence of alcohol being produced, and probably just beer back in the day. But I found records as far back as 1707 of alcohol production at the Glenmorangie site. And, you know, the other thing is 1843, the stills didn't just mushroom out of the ground from nowhere in 1843. You know, there were things going on prior to that. It just wasn't licensed and legal. The other mistake to make is to say that William Matheson put in our tall, elegant, tall stills. Also not correct. 1843, there were not tall stills at Glenmorangie, almost certainly, because Alfred Barnard, who wrote, you know, the big tome of visiting all the distilleries in the British Isles, he never mentioned tall stills at all. And he's such a detail-orientated guy. He would have mentioned if we'd had tall stills. What he says is that the Glenmorangie distillery is a bit run down and is in the process of acquiring new investments and is about to undergo a renovation, which links in perfectly with the next people involved with the distillery. Unfortunately, Matheson dies, and his wife, Anne Matheson, much more, from what we can see, dynamic business person than William Matheson ever was. She brings in outside investors, including the Maitland brothers, and they're guys that have done business in London and are clever businessmen who have been involved in some way in distillation operations, mainly gin, key core thing here already. And they come back up to their hometown. They invest in the Glenmorangie distillery. And 1887, from what we know, the tallest stills in Scotland go in then. They're not just groundbreaking because they're so tall. They're groundbreaking because they have steam heated coils in them as well. We're not the first, but we're one of the very first distilleries in Scotland to have steam heating coils, which between the effects of the tall stills and the steam heating means that there's a lot more copper coming into contact with our spirit. And the copper is cleaning up the spirit, creating a more refined, more elegant, more perfumed, and I would say more readily consumable and therefore more sellable product. I genuinely think the Maitland brothers were clever businessmen, and they saw that having this lighter, more fragrant style would make for a more quaffable whiskey that would be more sellable and intrinsically just a little bit faster maturing as well. Hence, one of the reasons why we are a 10-year-old, not a 12-year-old. But anyway, I'm going down the rabbit hole. We'll come back to all that as we taste. The distillers of Tain, previously referred to as the 16 men of Tain. And these days, one, they're not all men, which is hallelujah. We've moved with the times. It's about time. And there's not 16 of them. There's about 28 of them these days. But that's a good news story. As we've expanded the Glenmorangie distillery over the last few decades, we have resisted the temptation just to fully automate everything at every step. And we've kept a hands-on approach as much as we can at Glenmorangie. So real people are involved in the still house. You know, for example, it's not all done by computers. It's not just all timed with sensors. We have actual people running the distillery still. Talking about people, you can't have avoided, if you're a Glenmorangie fan, to know about at least the man on the left, Dr. Bill Lumsden, often referred to, certainly within the company, as the Willy Wonka of whiskey. He's the mad scientist that, you know, just by the very fact that this was the Milshin launch a few years ago in London, and I was actually behind the camera at that point, you know, and the photographer comes along and says, "Can we get a photo of you three?" And it's going to go into a newspaper somewhere, and Bill thinks that's an appropriate expression to make. You get the cut of his, what's the term? You get the measure of the man, I think is the term. So, Bill, quote of the century for Bill: "I've got a notoriously low boredom threshold. I've always got to be trying new things." Gillian MacDonald, our nose, She's really involved in the sensory analysis and putting together samples to create these delicious whiskies at the end of the process, and working for Bill. Brendan McCarron, head of maturing whiskey stocks, also involved in nosing, but much more responsible for what's in the warehouse maturing. So if you ever want to get anybody in the company a bit drunk and try and get the secrets out of them about what's where, Brendan's your guy, I think. And again, Bill's kind of whole mantra is this idea of what if? What if we tried that? What if we tried something different? Doesn't always have to be something that would immediately be something that was even within the bounds of the Scotch whisky laws and regulations. Something like Signet, right bouncing along the edges of what would be legally allowed. Many other things in the warehouse that I can't tell you about that are frankly probably not legal, and we'll have to take a view whether or not we ever release them, you know, but with real experiments going on. And as Bill says, all our experiments are about different ways to create different flavors, perfectly put. So there's madness in our method. We take barley, wood, and yeast like everybody else. And then what Bill's really, known for is the influence of wood finishing. We'll look into that in a little bit. The quality of the wood that we're using as well. The length of time, maturation is important. And obviously we've talked about the people. You know, people like Bill really put their own stamp on the whiskey itself. But if we start from base principles, and I promise we'll taste any second, 3 things that maybe just characterize Glenmorangie in particular. First of all, the Tarlody Springs are our own mineral-rich water bubbling out of the ground after 100 years trapped between limestone and sandstone bedrock. And it's very mineral-rich with magnesium and calcium salts. Just the sort of water that actually most Scotch distillers, Stillman certainly, would say, keep that away from me. I don't want that stuff furring up our stills. However, if you were to come over to the States here and go to Kentucky or Tennessee, or as you guys I'm sure know, if you were to ask a Belgian brewer what he thinks of mineral-rich water, 2 thumbs up. Exactly what brewers in Burton-upon-Trent in England, in Belgium, and distillers in Kentucky want is these minerals in the water. Why? Because very simply, the yeast uses those calcium and magnesium salts in a catalytic way to create more vigorous fermentation. The yeast goes crazy. Our fermentations are incredibly vigorous. Why does that matter? Well, different chemical pathways are created to create more fruity floral notes in that beer. And I know, especially talking to you guys, I have to be careful, but as a very general term, I would say Belgian beers are usually, you would think of as being pretty fruity and floral beers by and large, and you could probably track at least some of that down to the mineral-rich water. We think it's responsible for maybe 1 or 2% of the fruitiness in Glenmorangie, but no more. Just that little tiny bit of difference. In case you're wondering, no, there are no orange trees growing in Scotland. Somebody in our marketing department got a little bit over enthusiastic with the Photoshop to illustrate the point. But hey, you know, a bit of fun. The stills, we mentioned it already. The tallest stills in Scotland, and if we were ever to march a fully grown adult male giraffe into the still house, his head would be right at the top of our swan neck. So our incredibly tall stills, just the neck of the still is just a shade under 17 feet tall, which I've gone native being based in the States now. I can't think in meters anymore, but someone can work out what that is. A big problem for me, actually. I now no longer can really think in Fahrenheit or Celsius. I'm completely screwed up when it comes to temperatures. I just what is it? Warm. It's quite warm outside right now. That's about it. So we like to say our stills are the same height as a fully grown adult male giraffe. So what? Well, we've talked about it already. The copper contact, maximizing copper contact, and reflux in the neck of the still is core here. Is a core importance that really maximizes the amount of time with copper. The copper pulls out sulfur compounds, particularly, and leaves us with a much more fruity floral spirit, I guess. So I have a geek question. And for those of you that have been to Glenmorangie, maybe you shouldn't answer immediately because you'll probably know the answer from the tour. But how could one tell by looking at this photograph which set of stills are the wash stills and which set of stills are the spirit stills? Answers on a postcard. I'll give you a few more seconds. Anybody have an idea? Okay, it's actually a way that you could tell on most distillery stills. If you look down the left-hand side, there are these little portal windows all the way down on each still at the bottom of the still. And on the other side, there aren't those windows. Well, the windows are always a sign of a wash still. Simply, very, very practically put, we're putting a beer into the bottom of these stills and we're heating it up. And if you're not really careful, that beer will froth up so much, just like the head on a pint. And if it froths up, particularly with a very tall, straight-necked still like this, it could easily flash right off over the top of the neck of the still, which would be a very, very bad day at the distillery. We'd have to stop all distilling operations, clean the stills out, fire the stillman, recruit a new stillman and start again. So these windows allow the stillman to just see where the froth level is, and it should be just kind of halfway up the neck of these stills. And that means he's got the temperature controls just about right. So wash stills have the sighting windows. Spirit stills don't need them because they don't froth up. So we don't have to worry quite so much there. So there we go. Okay, promise we're going to taste. Acorn to vanilla is the kind of first theme of the tasting, I guess. That's the wrong type of oak completely, but it looks pretty. American white oak actually grows very tall and straight with branches, and then the branches come off at the very top of the canopy. And why is that good? Well, simply because a tall, straight trunk of tree without any branches means lots of staves without any little knots in them. You don't want a stave with a knot. A knot behaves like a champagne cork once pressurized on a cask, and at some point, probably in the middle of the night when no one's watching the barrel, it will ping out and all your whiskey will leak into the floor of the warehouse. So practically tall, straight trees are much better. But hey, the marketing guys thought that was a nice picture. I'm having a word with them about it because it's just wrong. But there we go. On the top right-hand side here is a picture of Bill Lumsden actually in the Ozark Mountains working with the foresters and actually counting the rings of a tree that's just been felled to check and see whether it's up to the specification we need. More on that in a little bit. Obviously then, once the tree has been felled, it's quarter sawn into planks. It's left to air season for most of our barrels for 2 to 3 years, coopered into casks. And we'll talk about why it's so important. But put simply, at least 60% of the flavor in any of our whiskies, including the first one we're going to taste, comes from the cask. So if you don't have good quality casks, you ain't going to have good quality flavor in your whiskey, as simple as that. We use for Glenmorangie Original and the 10-year-old a combination of first and second fill American white oak casks. First fill meaning barrels that, yes, would have had bourbon in them before, but contain the first filling of our spirit. And then we're using some barrels that we've used once already to mature Glenmorangie, which are second fill casks because they contain the second filling of our spirit. When we taste the two side by side, well, the first fill casks give a lot more vanilla note, coconut notes from the lactones and other wood-based substances. The second fill casks give less of that, but allow the underlying spirit style, that fruity floral style from the tall stills to shine through. More of that in a second. So normally when we start a tasting, I would start with the Glenmorangie Original, which is the current 10-year-old whiskey. But today, because you guys are special, we'll talk briefly about the fact that, lots of complexity, but really it's down to citrus and floral notes from the stills predominantly, and lovely vanilla coconut notes from the cask. But we're going to be tasting this. And well done for being so patient. Hopefully you have been patient, and we've got there to the first tasting. So Bjorn, shall we raise a glass and taste some old style Glenmorangie 10-year-old?
I say, let's crack the bottle.
Let's crack the bottle. Let's do it. Oh, mine's all taped up. Oh, no, there it is. So whilst you guys get your nose into this glass of 10-year-old, I'll just talk a little bit more about what's changed from this era to today. Well, a couple of things have changed. When Bill Lumsden came in the 90s to the Glenmorangie Company as distillery manager, one of the first things he did was to narrow the spirit cut and to move the spirit cut slightly forward in the run to give more of the fruity floral notes than the spirit was when he first tasted it, when he first got the job. So that was a change he made that was quite expensive. And he told me very recently about this. He was recounting the story again. He knew what he needed to do, what he wanted to do here. He knew it was going to be expensive. He also knew if he went to his direct boss, he wouldn't be given the time of day back then. And he said that the company at the time was very much being run based on costs, unfortunately. So Bill took a bold decision, certainly for a new young guy in the company. And he bypassed the entire chain of management. And at the time, we were still family owned by the McDonald family. And he went straight to David McDonald and spoke to him. And David McDonald immediately bought into it, saw where Bill was going, and approved it over the heads of everybody, everybody in the sort of chain of command. So that's how Bill managed to get that through. Now, the bottle that you have is an interesting one because I'm not exactly sure of the distilled, the year it was distilled, but it's around about probably just, well, it's hard to say whether just before the cut points changed or just after. I can't be certain, so that doesn't help a lot. But the second thing that's different is that when we moved to the Glenmorangie Original and the new packaging, Bill was able to do another thing he'd been wanting to do for a while and up the percentage of first fill American oak to give a bit more creaminess to the whiskey and a bit more body than it had before. So this older bottling won't have that higher percentage of first fill. It'll have a higher percentage of second fill, therefore, and therefore it should be a little bit more citrusy, a little bit more astringent, a little bit more floral than the current Glenmorangie Original that you know. So, cheers.
Cheers. Well, from this bottle, I looked it up on Whiskey Base, and there were many bottles with very small differences in the picture. And from what I could find with the barcode, it was one of the 90s.
Okay.
They mentioned third generation, but there wasn't a lot I could find about this one.
So bottled in the 90s.
Yes.
Okay, so then we're definitely getting back into, it'll be prior, it would have been distilled prior to the cut point changes. So you should get some of the older style, well, yeah, some of the older style spirit that Lumsden was less keen on, frankly. But it's certainly a little bit different. It's fairly recognizably Glenmorangie, but it's a little bit different at the same time. One geeky point to make about Glenmorangie 10-year-old and original, actually. In most of the world, and including the bottle you have there, I think, it's bottled at 40%. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. A little known fact, and we don't know why, but in the USA, Glenmorangie 10-year-old and now Glenmorangie Original has always been bottled at 43%. ABV. So, you know, still lightly chill filtered, but 3% higher alcohol strength. We've done some tests. Bill ran some tests a few years ago, blind nosing and tasting tests within the company to see if anyone could tell the difference between 40 and 43%. And the results were quite interesting. When we opened the blind nosing and tasting test up to anybody within the company that wanted to volunteer and come along and nose and taste, the results came back to say statistically, nobody could tell the difference. There was no statistical difference. Bill then ran the same test just within the team that are a part of the whiskey creation team. And again, completely blind, so nobody knew what even the experiment was. And when we do it amongst the group that are qualified and have passed all the nosing tests, there is a statistical difference. People can tell the difference. So I guess it depends on how good your sense of smell and taste is, whether you can pick up the difference between the 40 and the 43% bottlings. But anyway, just a little geeky point. If you ever come to the States, look it up. You get 3% more alcohol in your Glenmorangie original in the US. And don't ask me why, because I don't know. Nobody knows why. It's just always been that way.
And 50 milliliter more in the bottle.
Exactly, right? Yes, we get 750 ml and higher strength. It's great.
Yep.
There we go. So how do people find this first one? The sample I've got, I'm getting a lot more of kind of this, I want to say there's a slight sort of hint of like a solventiness in there that I like, I have to say. There's something to it that's a bit different. Is it as sophisticated as the current original? No. Has it got a bit more?
I think the current original is a lot softer and smoother. Yes. This one is harder and
yeah, it definitely is. There's a kind of zingy bite to it, which, don't get me wrong, I think I would, if I pick between the two, I would pick the original. But as a quirky whiskey to taste, I'm quite enjoying my little sample of the 10-year-old, the old school one right now, that's for sure. Looking, mine has the same, mine has the same label, same picture on the front. The pictures change sometimes on the front. Yeah. From some of these.
I didn't have the package. This was one I bought on holiday. I went a couple of years ago to Tenerife, and I saw in a very small store this bottle, and it wasn't anything I'm used to seeing in Belgium with the newer designs. So I took it home and saw it was a special edition.
Nice. Fantastic. So I guess it's just a little bit of an illustration of how fairly seemingly minor changes at the distillery can make differences down the line. So a change in the spirit cut, a slight change in the wood policy, and you see the difference there. It's not huge, it's not black and white, it's kind of shades of gray. But it's still, you know, this is the mark of Lumsden coming in and improving the quality of the casks, doing things that might be a little bit more expensive to do, but he believes strongly make a better whiskey. Flavor driven. So all I've done here is the same 3 tasting notes, and just to illustrate the point, more citrus, bit less vanilla, more floral, and yes, there's a lot more going on as well. But you know, I've come to the realization, I think anyway, as an ambassador, that most people like just to be pointed gently in the direction of what we're talking about, but maybe don't try. It's very easy for an ambassador to plant all sorts of tasting notes into someone's mind. And I think hopefully you appreciate using your own taste buds and your own mind to pick up everything in there. It's quite a personal thing. So I try not to steamroller people with a full long tasting of these things. I can if you want, but I like to just pick out a few things and give you directional, codes.
Well, sometimes it's nice to have a little guidance in it. You can't get some smells or taste from it if you didn't experience the part that they ascribed in the tasting.
Sure. I guess so. Yeah. So let me see what's going on here. Why did that not move? Oh, go up. Did I go past? No, there we go. Okay. So moving on from the kind of discussion of some of Bill's earliest tweaks at the distillery, one of the other things he did when he joined in the 90s was to resurrect some really pioneering work that had been done in the 80s and kind of just forgotten by the company in the kind of few years before he joined, sadly. And we were at risk of just kind of completely forgetting that we'd done this stuff. So, and that leads into the whole discussion of Bill Lumsden and finishing as well, because that had been some work that predates Bill, that had been done by the company. Obviously, with the 63 vintage that was finished that was released in 87, that predates Bill as well. So we had done some of this work into finishing and into American white oak and what would make a better cask. But as I said, it had kind of been, was in danger of being completely forgotten by the company. So Bill came in, changed the cut points at the distillery, but also started really hammering home the importance and running with the idea of the importance of the wood. So these experiments that we began in the 80s and then Bill resurrected, we're looking at how to improve the quality of American white oak casks. Through the 80s, as the Scotch industry and the American whiskey industry suffered greatly because people just weren't drinking whiskey, the quality of casks that were coming to us from the American whiskey industry was starting to really worry us. Just casks that were not well coopered. It was green oak that hadn't been seasoned properly, all sorts of issues. And so we really embarked upon experimentation to not only fix that, but to look at how we could make the best barrels ever. A lot of that work was done with a series of coopers in the States, looking at slow growth oak. And we'll get into this in a bit more in a minute. But slow growth oak, you know, all oak trees grow in the spring and in the summer. There's 2 growth parts to a year for an oak tree. All trees grow in the springtime, regardless, unless they're dead. They grow in the springtime because it's spring, you know, there's leaves, there are leaves coming out and all the rest. But some trees in the summer will do next to no growth. And that's largely because they are either in a shaded, as it says here, in a shaded spot where they are crowded out by other trees, or the topography of where they're growing, or they're in really poor soil and they can't get the nutrients they need. And therefore, those trees in the summer, when it dries out and they're shaded, just won't put any oak down in that ring structure. Okay, boring as all hell. Why are you telling me this? Well, spring growth is microscopically very spongy and porous. Summer growth is not. If you choose a tree that has hardly ever put any summer growth down, it maximizes the percentage of early spring growth, early wood, that is more porous. By that very nature, you fell a tree that is, on average, much more porous in its microscopic structure, which translates to a more porous oak barrel, which translates to an oak barrel that can soak up, just like a sponge, a lot more spirit deeper into the fabric of the wood. All of this should be good when it comes to trying to get your spirit to extract as much flavor as possible out of the oak into your delicious whiskey. So that was the theory, and that's work we were doing in the 80s. It kind of went a bit silent, and then Lumsden grabbed it with, you know, both hands and really got stuck into reinvigorating this experimentation. Why am I telling you that? Because the first whiskey that we're going to taste, there's 2 we're going to taste here that are a result of some of these experiments. This one is definitely just within Lumsden's era. So this is This will have been some of the earliest casks of the designer casks that Lumsden had done. Slow growth, air seasoned, lightly charred, heavily toasted American white oak barrels. Just with spirit distilled in 95, bottled in 2006 as a 10-year-old, all first fill American oak as well in the designer casks, bottled at 46% and therefore non-chill filtered. The wonderful artisan cask with a really geeky explanation on the label and a pretty geeky explanation on the great. Do you have that box there? The kind of window, the kind of frame box that it came with. Yeah, I just realized I didn't put mine out on the shelf. I have a couple over there, but I'm stuck here now. But yeah, really lovely whiskey. So why don't we taste it? And what I've done here, mainly because I had the tasting notes off the packaging, but I thought it would be interesting to get a sort of secondary opinion here. So Martine Nouet, who is a lovely lady, spends a lot of time, if not most of her time, on Islay, and has written a great book about whiskey and food, and writes a lot about whiskey tasting. So some really interesting notes here from her I thought I'd put in. And I'm going to pretend that I have it and just sip the 10 again, and you guys can do the real thing. I love the final notes. I think it's something we need for this, for these pandemic times. A malt to make peace with the whole world, soothing, graceful, and satisfying. Yes, please. Right. So, starts off, she's talking about estery and floral. Yeah, I love that, because even though this is all about the cask and we should be getting a lot of the lovely vanilla notes, there's enough of that in a narrower cut point that Lumsden had just put into place that we're seeing that now with this 10-year-old whiskey. You're seeing even through all that first fill vanilla, caramel, coconut notes from the first fill American white oak, punches of tangerine juice she's talking about on the nose. But there's the vanilla toffee and waffle. Now, I'm talking to the right people for waffles, right?
I can get the flowery notes out of it, but the waffle doesn't come in my mind. But
this must be a French waffle.
Yeah.
Martine's French waffles must be very different. So tell me what you're getting on the palate there. Are you agreeing, apart from the waffle thing, are you getting the floral notes? What else are you getting? Anything drastically different?
It's a little bit spicy.
Okay.
For me, it's very fresh, actually. And at the end, a little bit of spiciness indeed. But actually, it tastes very long. It's a long aftertaste, I think, for 46%.
Yeah.
And just 10 years old.
It just shows
I think that it's very, very interesting, that long aftertaste.
Yeah, it just kind of shows that age is not everything. Hey, I mean the quality of the oak and the quality of the distillate, for that matter. I won't name names. It's not the right thing for me to do. But I picked up a bottle of whiskey over the Christmas holiday period. That's a pretty old whiskey, Scotch whiskey, and it was quite a funky thing. And I was really had high hopes for it. And the first thing when I tasted it was, oh, that's disappointing. And the second thing I thought was, gee whiz, for a whiskey of this age, it really has, for me, it was just evidence of terrible, terrible quality distillate, because it was still, after all the years, just a fire on the mouth. It was just like drinking not very good moonshine, and it had many, many years in a barrel. And I thought, you've really got to be doing something wrong at your distillery if your spirit, after all these years and the opportunity for mellowing out, it hasn't done so. I was shocked at how terrible it was. Yeah, and I immediately saved a sample to send to Bill Lumsden. Whenever I find stuff like that, I send him samples so he can have a laugh as well. He appreciates that. I won't tell you what distillery. I promise I won't.
I can't share notes with you, David, because I was too late to receive the package. So, so I'm opening the tribute and the accord this evening.
Ah, cool. Well, they're great ones to get, and lucky you, I don't have those yet because of lack of travel and all the rest of it. I actually launched those. That's the new travel retail range, right? The 12, 14, and the 16.
Yeah.
Yeah. I launched those on my last international trip in whenever it was, October, November 2019. I launched in Hong Kong airport travel retail and thought, I don't need to pick those up now. I'll be able to get them very soon back home. And of course, nope.
we were there in, I think it was October, November 2019. Right after it was launched, I think, with the other David of the house. We were at the house at that. Yeah. Cool. And
so they had them at the distillery, did they?
Well, they had them at the house, but not at the distillery, I think. I'm not sure.
Oops, what's happening there? I've clicked through. Great. Yeah, they're nice whiskies, that's for sure. I actually, somebody in the company just told me that that there was apparently a case of them sitting in the New York office with my name on them, but nobody's been going in the office. No, nobody from logistics has been going in the office to send me them. So I'll have to maybe bribe someone. There's 6 bottles in that case. Just send me 5.
Yeah,
wink,
okay.
Wink. The interesting tasting notes here is this idea of flowering currant. Is anyone getting that? Because that's not something I pick up from Glenmorangie at 10 years old normally. Can understand the pear drops. That's a classic thing for sure. That sort of that note. Interesting if you do get a bottle of this. Obviously, the pack has all the details here. We've kind of gone through a lot of it already, but yeah. So slow growth oak, felled into quarter sawn planks, seasoned out in the open for 2 to 3 years, coopered into barrels. And then one of the key things here is not to give that barrel the usual char. What we want is actually a really light char and then a toast. And the difference between a char and a toast, a char uses some form of naked flame, and a toast uses indirect heat with a heating filament. And actually I had the opportunity to go to the Brown-Forman cooperage, which is just by Louisville Airport. And I went there with Bill Lumsden about 2.5 years ago now, actually to renegotiate our supplies from Brown-Forman of this quality of wood, because most of it's coming from them and has done for a long time. And the one part of the process in the cooperage that to this day, we had a hand in kind of developing the specs back in the 80s and 90s, but the actual device that they use to do the toasting, Brown-Forman won't even let Bill or myself look at it. We're never allowed in that part of it. We get open access to everything, apart from we can see the barrels going in. They literally go in on a conveyor into this part of the process. They come out the other end, and we've never been allowed to see it. And it was really annoying. Well, it was quite a remarkable moment 2.5 years ago when Bill and I were there, because we're having a great meeting, and they were all very excited to be continuing to work with us and all the rest of it. And the lady that was running the meeting, Bill asked, "Do you think we could see that part of the process?" And she initially said, "Yes, I think you can. Yep. I think we can take you in there." And Bill and I looked at each other and kind of, wow, we're going to see it finally. And then their head cooper for the whole of Brown-Forman came into the meeting, and she asked him, and he gave her a kind of dagger killer look. and immediately had to very politely say, no lads, sorry, you can't see that. You still can't see that part of the process. It's a trade secret. So close, so close. But there we go, one day. We know roughly how it works, but yeah, brown foremen keep it very under wraps, the actual process of the toasting rather than the charring. Great. Shall we move on to the next one, Bjorn? What do you think?
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
Unless somebody else want to share thoughts about the whiskey, but
Sure.
a quiet group.
Sorry, I've been talking too much. I'll shut up for a bit. Any comments? Any thoughts on this so far?
We're enjoying the taste.
Good. Oh no! I went to open my single cask and the cork just broke in the bottle.
Ooh.
Oh well, that's the world telling me something.
I think the world told me the same. When I opened these 8 bottles, 3 of them were broken corks.
Yeah, it's the risk of these older bottles, isn't it? I don't know about you guys. You probably all do the same thing, but I basically never throw a cork away anymore. When I've finished with any of the bottles, I have corks in jars all over this room, so that when a cork breaks, I can filter it out, put the whiskey back, and then I should have a cork that fits the bottle somewhere to replace it. So, do
you have special uncorking techniques, or is that something we can't do anything about?
Just cross yourself twice, hope for the best. I think one of the things is just to make sure you dampen the cork. Sometimes I think if it's dried out, but there's not much you can do, to be honest. It just happens. Mm-hmm. Too often it happens. I can't believe this one's just gone. That's annoying, but there we go. That's telling me not to drink it. Here's just some graphics to show kind of what I was talking about early and late wood in the ring structure, and then very stylized, but based on a scanning electron microscope image that we took, where you see the early wood here, and the late wood back there. And the late wood has these tiny pores. The early wood has these great big pores. So if you can maximize the amount of this in your tree, you're going to have a more porous barrel. And then this was some of the important work we'd done on air seasoning the wood out in the open versus kiln drying the wood. And this is obviously before it becomes a stave even. This is those quarter-sawn giant Jenga blocks that you sometimes see pictures of. Air seasoning is the way that the wine industry, anyone worth their salt in the wine industry, would insist on air seasoning. Unfortunately, parts of the whiskey industry has relied on kiln drying too much. And what you get if you kiln dry particularly is this kind of green note, this green, youthful, acrid note, spikes of acrid and greenness here with quite a small vanilla peak. But when you look at when we're air seasoning, this great big and broad spectrum of vanilla note, a much more toasty note, your acrid note's lower, you get this almondy note that's not really present at all in the kiln dried oak. So, this is obviously very stylized, but we have done a significant amount of actual research into this and can prove that designer casks, air seasoned wood makes a big difference to the final whiskey that you taste. So there is madness in our method, but you can taste it in the end. And the story obviously didn't stop at Artisan Cask, because we actually have had now 2 releases of Glenmorangie Astar. Now, Bjorn, I can't remember which one you said you had.
You had the older one, the 2008 version.
Okay, so I've put the wrong picture up, and I think I knew I'd done that, mainly just because I couldn't find a high enough resolution picture of the first bottle to keep my presentation nice and pretty. So there are 2 versions of Astar. This is the more recent 2017 release, but the first one was 2008 or 2009 release of Astar. And Astar is a Scots Gaelic word that means the journey or journey. So this is, continuing that pursuit of perfection. And here's a picture of Bill again out in the Ozark Mountains on a very, very, very cold winter's day. A few years back, I was with him on that trip. And not only does Bill look very cold there in that picture, but I can also confirm that Bill was magnificently hungover in that picture as well, because we'd been out, we'd had some meetings with the local, sales team and all the rest, and Brown Foreman people in Louisville the day before. And then we'd had a big dinner and a few whiskeys, a few cocktails, as you do. And then we'd kind of come back to the hotel, and Bill had suggested maybe we have one final drink at the bar. So off we went to the bar. And who should we bump into at the bar? Actually, persona non grata these days, but it's a story I have to tell. We bumped into a certain Mr. Jim Murray at the bar. And at that point, everything went downhill very quickly. And hence the serious hangover the next day on Bill. Doesn't he look great? So
he can hide it very well.
He can. It's amazing. I don't know how the guy does it, but the lifestyle he leads, and he still doesn't age. The guy just doesn't age. It's unbelievable, Dr. Benjamin Button Lumsden, I think is who he is. Right, a slide from Bill and a quote from him that says, we now have a reasonable understanding of how maturation influences whiskey flavor. I won't spend a lot of time on this because, hey, it's not that massively interesting, but it just gives you an idea of some of the sort of at a top level, some of the kind of top line pathways to the flavors you're getting. If you look down the list, lignin, production of vanilla notes, increased complexity of the final whiskey, oak tannins, again, promotion of oxidization products. You're getting oxidative maturation, creating all these lovely additional tropical fruit notes in your whiskey, and then lipids into oak lactones, which are again those kind of coconutty, woody notes that you get in the whiskey. So just I thought a little bit of geekery, nothing too much, just something to show some of that we are actually, it's not just all marketing bullshit. We are actually doing the research into this and trying to understand what goes on. So that's some of the thinking behind why we are air seasoning and using slow growth oak and all the rest. So again, madness in our method. Let's go back and taste, because we've jumped through that a bit. Let's taste Astar. Oh, I've missed a slide. I should have had a tasting slide for Astar. I don't have that. I apologize. Let's nose and taste the Astar and see what you think in comparison to the artisan cask. Now, bottling strength here is 57.1. Is that right? I think 57.1 on the first release.
Yes, that's true.
57.1 on the first release and 54.2 on the second release. First fill American oak cask, designer casks, non-chill filtered. Again, lovely coconut, creamy notes here. Just really emphasizing the very best of American oak coming through. But yeah, slightly higher strength than the artisan cask. Quite a lot higher strength, should I say. Any thoughts? Come on, Eddie. You're such a Glenmorangie fan. You got to have some thoughts on Astar. I'm pretty sure it's one of your favorites, right?
I'm cheating already. I'm at the Signet right now.
Sorry. That's me being too long-winded. Sorry. But actually, it's funny you talk about Signet, because one of the component parts of Signet is actually quite similar to Astar. there's some of this kind of younger 10-year-old-ish Glenmorangie that's been aged in first fill designer casks as a component in most bottlings of Signet. And it's what gives it that creaminess, as well as the, you know, we get loads of coffee and espresso chocolate from the high roast chocolate malt, but Bill wanted to bring back that sense of almost the creaminess in a coffee sometimes, whether it's the what do they call it in Italy when you get that foam on the top, whether it's that or whether it's the sense of a cappuccino or something. Bill wanted to bring that creaminess back in. So it's actually very similar to Astar spec Glenmorangie that's going into Signet as a component. Bjorn, do you want to, how are we doing for timing? Do you want to keep going, or do people want to spend a bit more time on Astar?
I think we're going at a nice pace.
Okay.
This way everybody can enjoy the whiskey and not going too fast. But I hope most of you have more than one glass to put the whiskeys in. It's always nice to compare the different whiskeys with the predecessors.
Absolutely. Cool. So continue enjoying that glass of Astar.
Yeah.
One point to make on Astar is it does not officially have an age statement on it. And therefore, you know, legally, technically, I can't claim an age to it. However, I can confirm that it is of comparable, very comparable age to the last couple of whiskeys you've tasted. There's no difference there, really. And the second edition Astar is marginally, by a matter of months, older than the first edition, and slightly lower in strength. Some people, Bill Lumsden, actually, to give him credit for admitting this, Bill said that he prefers the second Astar, which Brendan McCarran put together, over the first. I'm not sure which one I like more. They're both great whiskies.
Could I just ask a question?
Sure.
If they know how old, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. If they know how much or how old the Astar is, and you said that the two versions are months apart, why not put it on the bottle if that improves the sellability of the product? Because you said that sort of legally you can't put an age on it, which seems to suggest that putting an age on whiskey is very important. It's
a great question, and one that I wouldn't disagree with you on. But over the years, my colleagues my various colleagues that have come and gone in the marketing department have sometimes taken a different view about the importance of age statements to myself and those of us that are involved in making the whiskey or talking about it passionately with people like yourselves. So it wouldn't necessarily have been my choice to have left the age statements off the Astars, but it's what I had to work with. But yeah, I'm in agreement. Age statements, I think we should hopefully all know that they are not the be all and end all of a sign of quality, but when they're not on a whiskey, they raise a lot of questions, particularly amongst the very people that are maybe not so into their whiskey and not quite so knowledgeable. And therefore, I would argue putting an age statement on a bottle of whiskey allows you to not have to talk about the age of it, and allows you to talk about all the exciting stuff you're doing to make this unusual whiskey. Whereas the people who have my colleagues over the years that have kind of decided this one's not going to have an age statement on it, have taken the view that by having the age statement not on there, it allows us and forces us to talk about the exciting things we're doing whilst not distracting people with the age statement. That I don't agree with that point of view personally. Usually, I mean, Signet's a bit different because there's such a vast different age of casks in Signet, but with something like Astar, where it was all pretty much the same age stock, what's the harm? But yeah, heard and agreed.
About the Astar, I am a very bad reference to tell people what they should smell or taste in whiskies. My wife, for example, is much better at it. She can take a lot more tastes and references from the whiskey. But for people like me who struggle, especially with the cask strength, it's never a shame to put in a couple of drops of water.
Definitely, absolutely.
I just did it myself, and now the scent is much bigger, and you can get a lot more out of it.
I absolutely should have mentioned that, particularly with this at 57.1% alcohol. A drop of, a good drop of, a few drops of water are pretty much essential for most people, I would say. I came from the Scotch Malt Whisky Society with everything being cask strength, and I still would add, water to my Astar, and it really allows you to pick up more. Just because otherwise the alcohol is just such a bombardment to your senses and to your mouth. And then also, we know that adding drops of water to a whiskey tends to broaden out the more floral perfume notes in the whiskey. So if we're concentrating with Astar on the notes coming from the cask, the vanilla, the coconut, the toffee notes, by adding water, you will add all those lovely citrus floral notes and make a much, much, much more complex whiskey.
That's true.
Yeah.
I just got my 2017 release also from the shelf, and I tasted them next to each other, but they are quite different in taste. And that's why I have the question: what makes an Astar an Astar? What's the line between the two?
Obviously, so at a top level, the whole mantra of the designer oak casks, applies to both, but the difference in flavor profile is just down to cask selection more than anything. Brendan's picked a slightly different cask component to Bill. I'm trying to think what else there was that was different about Astar 2, actually. There was slightly older stock, but not by much. I think that was it, really. It was slightly lower strength, which would have, meant that we reduced it slightly more, which will give you a slightly different flavor profile. As we were talking about, that happens in the glass as well, but that's largely it.
Well, they are both delicious whiskies. But I don't see the line. I don't see what makes Astar than Astar.
Just the use of designer oak casks. It's the first fill, the journey of the oak to the whiskey. Astar. So it's just the use of it's whiskies coming from that designer oak program. Is all that it really means. So who knows? There might be a third Astar one day. You never know.
Were the artisan cask and the Astar the only two whiskies of Glenmorangie with those slow-growing oaks in Missouri, or are there other bottlings with the same?
So the vast majority of the slow-growth oak goes into Glenmorangie 10-year-old original, and it's an important part of Lumsden's strategy to slowly, slightly tweak the style from being what it was in that 10 to being what we know now in the original, with more of those kind of coconut, vanilla, toffee notes coming in. So we can only really come out with another Astar if and when Bill forecasts that he doesn't need all of those casks to go into the next bottling of original.
Okay.
So, it may happen. There's always the debates within the company. Can you spare us some, Bill? Yes, no. There's a pull and push between certainly people like me that are like, come on, Bill, we want another Astar. And then Bill, who says, settle down, young lad. I've been doing this longer than you've been alive almost. I know what I need for the future. Otherwise, I'll cannibalize all my other projects that I have for them. So it's not as simple as just, yes, they're there, let's bottle them.
Yeah.
And like I said, some of it's going into Signet as well.
I can agree.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, we've talked about first and second fill casks. There's Eddie. Eddie, something to add?
How are you?
How are you? I thought I suddenly saw your face, so I thought you were gonna add something.
I wasn't dressed, so
we don't want to see that. No naked grouse here.
That's it. That's
it. So I threw in the with my fledgling Photoshop skills, I threw in this third cask on top here to get us starting to talk about the idea of extra maturation. We've talked about, you know, oak being important and Lumsden's pioneering work, but really the big thing he's famous for is really running with the idea of extra maturation in wine casks. So why don't we talk about that? We're not going to taste La Santa today, which is the current sherry finish. We're not going to taste the Quinta Ruban, which is the now at a 14-year-old age statement ruby port finish, although we are going to taste something very special out of the port cask, and the Nectar d'Or, which is the turn finish. But we are going to talk about, first of all, a whiskey that has benefited from the work Bill's done in finishing and the work Bill's done in understanding American oak, because the 18-year-old, in my mind, has massively improved in about the last 5 years. Just a step change in the quality of this whiskey. And that is entirely down to the policy of just using our casks twice and Bill's understanding of finishing. So why don't we get into it whilst you taste it? So I get quite passionate about the 18. For me, if I had to choose one bottle of whiskey, full stop, from anywhere, from anyone, to go off and be stranded on a desert island with my last bottle of whiskey, it would be this Glenmorangie 18. And that's because whiskey for me is all about mood and place and who I'm with. And one day I'll be absolutely in the mood for an Ardbeg Corryvreckan and not want to touch Glenmorangie. And the next day it'll all be about Glenmorangie, 10-year-old, the old 10, you know? So lots of fluctuations in what I like. But there's one whiskey that I find, regardless of place or mood or who I'm with, I always just love the whiskey. I'm just fall in love with it every time I taste it. And for me, it's Glenmorangie 18. So I don't want to gamble with my last bottle of whiskey on earth on this desert island. I want to have an absolute surefire winner, and it would be the 18. The whiskey itself is a combination of two different maturation regimes. Some of the whiskey is aged fully for 18 years in American white oak ex-bourbon barrels. Some of the whiskey spends 15 years in American white oak ex-bourbon barrels and is then transferred to Oloroso sherry casks for a 3-year finish. The percentages are roughly 70% all in American oak, 30% in 15, and then 3-year sherry finish. So if you were lucky enough to come to the distillery and persuade Bill to let you into the warehouse where those barrels are sitting, you could taste two different flavor profiles of an 18-year-old Glenmorangie. And it's the combination of those two together that gives us so much more than the sum of its parts. How so? Well, American oak for just 18 years for Glenmorangie. If we cherry pick a few casks, we could easily make a magnificent whiskey. But when we're making even slightly more than tiny amounts, you know, 18 isn't a huge release, but when we're making slightly more, the danger is that there'll be the odd cask there where the tannins in the American oak after 18 years have just given too much astringency, a bit too much bite on the finish, and it's taken the balance off it. So the 30%, the other component, the 30% finishing in sherry casks is really there not to give you a huge sense of a sherried whiskey. It's really just to polish, round off the 70%, the chance of it having a little bit too much astringency without really giving a heavy sherry note. And I think it does it wonderfully. It brings these lovely kind of hazelnut notes to the table. So I get like hazelnut creme brulee with Glenmorangie 18-year-old. Bill's notes are more honey, figs, and hazelnuts, is what he kind of gets. But wow, is this just a bloody good whiskey. So I'll shut up and let you enjoy it.
David, why does it say on the bottle extremely rare? Is it just to let the people buy it more, or
Yes.
what is actually the intention of that?
It's called marketing. I'm afraid.
Okay.
There's no, yeah, I mean, sorry for being flippant, but that doesn't mean anything really. I asked the team back when that first went on the label, gosh, in 2007, what's that about? And they said, well, because we make a lot less 18-year-old than all of our sort of direct competitors. That's about as sensible an explanation as I can give you. But yeah, I mean, is it extremely rare? Not when you buy single cast bottlings, not in comparison to that. No, it's not. So yeah, I have to apologize for that. But yeah, God, it's a good whiskey though.
I was always told that it was because the people that like that whiskey very much are extremely rare.
There you go.
But it's my favorite, you know.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Ah, that's great to know. Cool. Well, we'll definitely have to share a glass of, or two, or three.
Yeah. When we are at the house, and we'll take Torben with us. Our Swedish friend is in the call right now, so we'll take him with us.
Yeah. We'll have to persuade David up at the house to get the karaoke machine back on as well. I'm sure you probably had the experience of the karaoke machine at Glenmorangie House in the buffalo room, and the brown paper bag game. Have you played the brown paper bag? I'm sure, yes. It's so Glenmorangie House, guys. For those of you that don't know, is our kind of private country house hotel. I think it's got 9 bedrooms in total. It used to be a kind of gentleman farmer, sort of mid-tier farmers home, I guess. So it's not a big fancy kind of palace or anything, but it's a very nice, substantial building surrounded by the Cadbull estate, which actually are the fields that we grow our own Cadbull single estate barley on. And then you can walk straight down onto the shoreline and walk along to the Cadbull stone, which gives the emblem on the bottles there. It's an 8th century carving. So it's a beautiful place. And of course, after, it was only recently that we even got reliable internet into the house. So we had to invent our own fun. And they all pretty much were some version of drinking games. Surprise, surprise.
Well, I know last time we were with I think it was Amy. She was drinking. I think it was La Santa from a straw. So.
Oh my gosh! La Santa.
So I know the kind of games. I know the kind of game they're playing at the house.
Oh, dearie me. Yes, there's been some hijinks, fun and games at the house for sure. I remember one time having to get up very early to see a bunch of guests off who were leaving to fly back to the US. And my boss insisted that we both get up to serve them all a cup of tea before they got on the transportation to Inverness Airport. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, I was in my dressing gown outside the front pouring cups of tea for people. And there was another time where one of my former colleagues and I, over about 4 days staying at the house, had this kind of bet that started off as a joke and then got more and more serious every evening after a few drinks, that one of us would go and swim in the ocean down at the bottom of down there by the beach. It was March. It was March. So And then on the last morning, we both agreed to do it. So we actually did. I've swum off there in March, and jeez, is it cold. It's
always a lot of fun. It's always a lot of fun in the house.
Yes, absolutely. So how's everyone else finding the Glenmorangie 18-year-old? I hope you're enjoying it as much as we do.
Yeah, it's very nice.
Very nice indeed. It's the best one so far.
So good. Oh, it's interesting. It's 43% ABV and lightly chill filtered. And you might think, wow, wouldn't it be better at 46? Not necessarily. I mean, I've had a chance to taste the whiskey before, out of the casks and sort of crudely put together in the lab. And whilst it was delicious and wonderful, it kind of lost some of the elegance that the 18 as we know it has. So, I personally said to Bill, why can't we make this 46 at least and non-chill filtered? And he doesn't want to do it because he thinks it would lose some of the elegance. So chill filtration is not a switch. It's not on or off. There's a range of kind of parameters in between. And when we do chill filter at Glenmorangie, which is, only on some of our whiskies, we're never giving it a full-on harsh chill filtration. We'll drop the temperature of the whiskey by as little as possible. And then we'll use a really coarse filter compared to what we could use. So we're not stripping all the lipids out by any means. It's just enough to, in some whiskeys, stop the haze effect. And in this whiskey, Bill actually thinks it's a useful tool to just give him the level of elegance that he's looking for in the whiskey. I was right up there as a chill filtration snob when I was at the Whiskey Society, but it's interesting talking to the actual people who make whiskey around Scotland. It's not always a bad thing, not always. It is if you're drinking a cheap blended Scotch in a plastic jug bottle that's had loads of caramel coloring added and it's 3 years old and it's been chill filtered to the end of its life. Yeah, of course. I mean, that's not good. But why are you drinking that stuff? You deserve it if you're drinking that stuff. Outside of that, let's not be dogmatic. Let's actually think about these things and figure out what works. And whilst I'd love to see a limited release 18-year-old non-chill filtered, I would be sad to see this go as it is at the same time, that is for sure. Just to blow our own trumpet a bit, we've done okay with this whiskey. A few gold medals from, places that matter and some nice pictures, really. That's it here. Okay, so kind of leading on from the idea that, sometimes things like explaining the chill filtration thing is interesting, and people who are whiskey drinkers and fans don't always think of it that way. We, a few years ago, gave you, the whiskey fan, the opportunity to in a small way become a bit, or to get into the mindset of Bill and the whiskey creation team. I don't know if anybody here was part of this. I was frantically running around, mostly North America, running this program over here for a year with lots of these sample bottles. It was great fun, really great fun to get my audience thinking like a whiskey maker. And what Bill had done was he had bottled three very different casks, and just labeled them A, B, and C, and just given the absolute minimum information that cask A, the whiskey had been finished in Grand Cru Burgundy casks, B, the finish was Grand Cru Bordeaux, and C was Manzanilla Sherry. We didn't know the age. We didn't know the provenance of the previous casks. That is literally what's on that slide, is as much information as I got, and therefore as much information as any of my audiences got. What I actually tried to do as well was not even tell them Burgundy, Bordeaux, or Sherry until after they'd tasted all three and voted. And then I went back and told them the cask types. So really just, what does it taste like? Which one did you like the most? I guess I was a little disappointed. I'm going to put this up here. I was a little disappointed because the one that, as soon as I saw this program, I said, I know which one's going to win. Yawn, it's going to be the sherry one because sherry, 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 everybody likes sherry. I was right. And I don't know about Eddie, I think you're nodding that you did this program as well. The Manzanilla Sherry Whiskey is very nice. And it's a lovely bottle of whiskey. But of these three, it was my third choice, I have to say. And the Burgundy A was my first choice. The one that was most funky, most unusual was my first choice. Now, I guess I drink Glenmorangie a lot, not a lot of it, but I drink it, regularly. And therefore, for me, maybe I'm not your target audience. I was looking for something a bit out of the ordinary and different. But A is pretty good, I have to say. And we never saw that come to light of day. Manzanilla Sherry was in every market that we ran this, in Europe, in North America, and in Asia, the hands down, by far, the winner, which once we selected the liquid, you guys even got to play a little bit of the role of the marketing, the dreaded evil marketing department. And you were given 3 options here for the packaging. The whiskey was called Tachta, chosen in Scots Gaelic, and 3 options here. Again, I personally would have gone for the kind of blue and white label on the right. I like that one. But anyway, the middle label with the kind of black and orange is the one that was chosen. And hence we have Glenmorangie Tachta, which I believe is the next whiskey on the on our tasting rundown. I'm going to put this over here. So you should all have some Glenmorangie Tachta, and I'm giving you a hint to some of the flavor notes here. Manzanilla Sherry, which is fairly unusual for a single malt to be finished in. But let's pour ourselves that bottle now and have a little taste. I'm talking about, on top of all these notes here, kind of rich caramelized orange. And I guess one of the things that you could add to this that would differentiate it from some of the other sherried Glenmorangies like La Santa is maybe this slightly savory, salty note, almost like salted cashews or something is in there too. So I'll let you savor, enjoy, think about the flavors and aromas on Tachta. And I'll just tell you a little thing here. I have to be careful because Eddie in particular will probably be jumping on the first available plane and beating down my door. But when we did this project in the States, first of all, let me go back a slide, 2 slides. You see how there's 2 different sizes of those not for sale bottles, the sample bottles. The company bottled the small ones because they're Scottish and cheap, and they didn't want to give me, whopping great big samples. And then, even though we weren't selling them, the legal department for the company over here in the States said, that's not in a legal size of bottle for the US. This is a 375 or something. That's not a legal bottle size. Just in case we ever get in trouble, even though it's not for sale, we want you to not do the program because those bottles just aren't legal. So the company wanted to do the project still and quickly bottled a whole bunch more samples in full 750 ml US bottles and sent them over. I already had the other samples as well, which has resulted in me still, I think half my house is built on cases of A and B. I have so much A and B at home. It's just, I'm looking to my right through the door here and into my kids' kind of classroom setup for virtual learning. And behind the old IKEA couch that we have shoved in there is a double stack wall of A's and B cases. So if anybody ever makes it to the US post-COVID and you want to taste
you
the ale,
you always are able to send some to Belgium.
Ah, there you go. Well, listen, I could definitely, what I should do is I should bring some with me when we next, we should arrange to at some point meet at the house, and I'll just load, I'll load my wine suitcase full of A's and B's.
Okay.
And,
That sounds nice. Deal.
right. And I think Amy and all the rest as well, all the stuff at the house would appreciate it as well.
I think so.
We can just leave our address in the chat now, and you'll send them over or not?
Well, you know, we could try, but I've tried my best to even send Lumsden samples of things like interesting American whiskies or things that are launched here by competitors. And it's in the last 5 or 6 years, sending anything, certainly into the UK, but I've had problems with most of Europe too. The customs officers are much more on their game than they ever used to be. You know, it always was hard to get stuff into the US. The US customs are tough, but it was really easy to send stuff everywhere else apart from Australia. That's the hardest of all. Forget it with Australia. But now, you know, Europe has got its act together, and I even sent Bill a Christmas present, and the UK customs wouldn't release it to him until he paid tax on it. It's a Christmas present. Pathetic. It's ridiculous. Yeah. But, you know, who knows? We could try. So what do you think, guys, of Tacta? You get that saltiness coming through on there at all? It was always that kind of caramel, orange, and salted cashews, I think was what I got.
Yeah, lots of fruits and flowers.
I mean, it's a good whiskey, definitely a good whiskey, and I can see why it won. I just think maybe I'm just the kind of the salty old Glenmorangie pirate who wanted something weird and wacky. You know, I don't know.
It makes me think on the very old Burgundy cask that they had with the still with the cylinder cokers.
Yeah. And then also, if you ever want to approximate, very approximate, because it wasn't really made this way exactly, but Companta. If you liked Companta, I've found a little bit of home blending of the A sample and B sample can get me quite close to a Companta. So I don't have to drink all my Companta. So interesting thing about Companta, Bjorn, I see you have a bottle there. Yeah. That whiskey actually, what Bill Lumsden learnt from Companta led to some of the projects surrounding Ardbeg Anno, strangely enough, because Bill was very much of the belief before Companta that once a whiskey was in a bottle and sealed, it didn't change, and it was what it was. But with Companta, for one reason or another, we were slightly rushed with, we'd formulated the whiskey, it was all ready to go in the lab, and then it was slightly rushed in terms of getting it down the bottling line, slightly faster than Bill would have wanted. And what we found with Companta was when and I'm talking about sealed bottles, when they were the first ones we opened for the first 6 months or so, 8 months or so, when we drank the whiskey then, it was quite, the wrong word would be disjointed. There was definitely two different parts to it. There was the influence of the Burgundy cask, and there was the influence of the Rasteau red wine from the south of France. And you could get the savory note, and then the sweet note, and then the savory note, and it bounced around on your palate. But go forward a year and open a supposedly new bottle of Companta, and it wasn't like that. It was all seamlessly knitted together. The flavors just kind of flowed from one to the other. And that's where Bill suddenly kind of realized, hang on, bottle maturation in Scotch whiskies can happen here. We've just seen it happen. And maybe it happens mostly with whiskies that have been wine or sherry influenced. So when it came to putting Anno together, which had 3 very different barrel maturation types going together, the whole idea of the marrying vat that we have there built, cost a fortune, was to try and stop Anno changing in the bottle. We wanted it to be having done all its getting to know each other in the marrying vat already. So yeah, really a direct influence of, you never put the 2 whiskies together. You never think Campanta, oh, Ardbeg Anno. But in that man's head, one thing led to another there for sure. But, they were fun whiskies.
Now you're talking about the private editions. My first Glenmorangie I've ever tasted was the Sonata PX, and it just blown me away, and I was sold for Glenmorangie. And afterwards, I've tasted that 18th and the Artane from the private edition range, and it was just so lovely. What's the story about that Sonata PX? Is that also a marriage about the casks, or?
No, it was all finished in Pedro Jimenez casks. There were no other types of sherry used, but in the similar sort of way, it influenced the current version of La Santa, wherever my La Santa's gone over here, because La Santa up until, gosh, I forget, about 5 years ago or so, maybe a bit longer, 7 years ago, was only finished in Oloroso sherry cask, as had the previous, when it was called the sherry wood finish, it was Oloroso sherry finished. And Bill saw the reaction to Sonalta PX and the result that it had on the whiskey. He knew that he couldn't make La Santa 100% Pedro Jimenez finished because, well, one, he didn't want to, but two, just too expensive, and we couldn't get enough casks. But he, at that point, realized he wanted to put a component of PX finishing into La Santa to give it more of that chocolatey note, that chocolate raisin note that it maybe hadn't had before. I asked the marketing team, I was like, well, if we're changing the formula of the whiskey, instead of continuing to call it La Santa, we should call it La Santa PX. But they didn't like that. So it's still La Santa, and nobody really knows that there's PX in there. You have to really look at the label, but it's, anywhere between 20 and 40% PX casks, depending on how they're putting the whiskey together at any one time in La Santa. So there was a knock-on from the PX as well. And interesting you mentioned Artane, because most people, I think, would say Sonalta PX is their favorite private edition. Not me. Artane is hands down by far my favorite private edition. Just so good. So good. How that man, Bill Lumsden, managed to tame Sassicaia casks and make the whiskey have all the lovely red fruit and velvety and sort of peach notes in there, and tame all the tannic notes that you'd expect to get from Super Tuscan. He's a genius. He's the Willy Wonka of whiskey. It's pretty impressive.
You guys are killing me. I have 8 of the 10 private editions. The ones I don't have are the Artane and the Sonalta PX. So
they are the hardest.
So I am very happy to have 2 bottles of each left at my home.
Look at you. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, they're the hardest ones to find. By far, the hardest ones to find. I don't know.
I think now as well the most expensive as well. I saw a little time ago that Sonata for 400-500 euros, and I think I bought it in the beginning around 60-70 euros. I think it was.
There were 2 bottlings of Sonalta PX that came out as well. There was a very small initial batch of Sonalta PX that came out in 1 liter bottles.
Yes, indeed.
And that was supposed to be for travel retail. And it was just, I don't know what happened to it. It seemed like a bit of disorganization within the sort of marketing team, but it came out. And then they said, oh, no, let's bring it out domestically around the world as well. So then there was the second, either 70 CL or 750 ml in the US bottling. But yeah, the very first one, there were, if you're lucky, grab yourself a liter of Sonalta PX. That's the way to go. Can you imagine if they knew how sought after that whiskey would be if they'd ever have bottled a liter of it. It's crazy, really. There we go.
I hope Glenmorangie will do another time something like that, like the Artane or like the Sonalta PX, something very, very special like that as well. I hope so.
We've got a lot of experiments up our sleeves, so watch this space.
Nice to know.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. There's we've got at least two things launching this year at that sort of price point or less, and then a couple of things more sort of rarities as well. So yeah, definitely got some stuff.
So open the borders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be nice. So madness in our method. Well, you don't get much more crazy than this. I have to say, when I first saw this packaging, I hated it. Personally, I absolutely, Eddie's like, yeah, I hated it. I have come to love it, and I am man enough to admit when I was wrong. At the end of the day, it was kind of interesting to notice that the very people who had most of the people who had a kind of allergic reaction to this packaging were the same people that go around telling everybody the packaging doesn't matter, it's all about the whiskey. Well, you can't have it both ways. If the packaging doesn't matter, why do you care? So luckily, regardless of what you think about it, the whiskey is really unusual and really delicious, and goes back to some of the earliest days with Bill Lumsden in the company again. He'd done his 2-3 year stint as Glenmorangie distillery manager, and he had just been promoted to master distiller, and he was starting to do this sort of big press trips around the world. And he'd thought about the idea of Hungarian Royal Tokai casks, and he'd just actioned it, and he'd filled the barrels, and they were merrily finishing. And off he went as the new rock star, Dr. Bill, master distiller extraordinaire. And he will admit to this. He took his eye off the ball. He tasted the whiskey just before he went off on a mega trip, and he said it was sublime, but he thought it could go a little bit longer. He left it 8 or 9 months and tasted it again, and he had completely ruined it by leaving it. It had gone over the top of the hill, had become completely over-dominated by the Hungarian oak, and he'd completely messed it up. So we never saw that Hungarian Royal Tokai finished Glenmorangie. It, would have been blended off slowly in something else, so no one noticed it. He's the sort of guy, though, that doesn't like making mistakes and will keep something like that in his mind and mention it after a few beers. I'm going to get that right one day, David. He's talked about it for years with me. So it's so great to see Hungarian Royal Tokai come back, and you can bet that Bill had his eye on the ball this time. He was checking it all the time and bottled it at its absolute peak. So I hope you enjoy this. The story behind it, and it would have been the story for the first one that got messed up until it got messed up, is Bill always thought that it gave him this flash of memory to eating or smelling the baking and then eating the cake that his grandmother would bake him standing in her kitchen when she would bake him a birthday cake when he was very young. And it's the sponge cake. It's that sweet but slightly salty, savory sponge cake. It's the fruit filling sort of line of fruit. It's the not massively oversweet icing, but just the combination of all of it. So it's not as sweet as, for example, over here in the States, Americans are a bit perplexed. They're like, I was expecting it to be much sweeter. And I'm like, well, yes, everything in the US is much too sweet already. It's a Scotsman's memory of a cake, which is, about a third of the sugar content probably. So keep that in mind. This is not, and nor should it ever be, trying to be a whiskey liqueur. This is whiskey that has a flavor memory of cake, would be the best way to put it. So Are we ready?
Yeah.
So, a tale of cake. And the number one thing Bill says is pineapple upside down cake. So guess what? There's a pineapple-y fruit note in there. There's a cake note in there. That sort of spongy, slightly savory nature of a sponge cake. And I get, this is my own tasting note, this sense of kind of mango, almost like there's mango puree or mango preserve as laced in just a tiny amount through the middle of it. If you're a fan of Glenmorangie Nectar d'Or, you would be forgiven for thinking, well, this is just more of that, until you taste it and see that actually very similar wine production process, genetically the same oak, but growing in Hungary, and the oak is very different in its nature, and it creates a quite distinct style of wine, and it most definitely creates a distinct finish on Glenmorangie compared to the Nectar d'Or with the Limousin oak. So yeah, not just the bottle, as Bjorn was showing, not just the bottle is wacky, but the packaging, the box is right. Whoever our marketing department's dealer is, I need to be hooked up with them because they've got some powerful drugs. And yes, shock horror, that is a cocktail made with cake. And I have to admit, it is a darn delicious one. And that's coming from me. And I'll tell you this now, there's only one food that I don't eat. There's only one thing in the world that I just can't eat, and it's pineapple. I don't like pineapple. And it's not the flavor of pineapple. So I'm fine with the whiskey. It's the texture. There's something about pineapple. It just, no, thank you. I'm not into it. So for me, it was always going to be a challenge when I saw this was all about pineapple. And because I actually like the flavor of pineapple, the cocktail, for example, as long as I don't eat that garnish, really interesting cake, old fashioned, made with some really unusual bitters and in fact, in the US, there's really boomed during COVID and everything. There's a company called Cocktail Courier, and you can actually order, and it comes in a box, and you have a bottle of cake and all the different components you need to make X number of cocktails. Obviously not the ice, but and it's for someone like me that's not really very good at making cocktails. It's been a great thing through last year to be able to play around and follow the little online video and make this cocktail. The pineapple upside down cake there, kind of reimagined, was a project we worked with that kind of got cut short by COVID, of course, but with Dominic Ansel, who is a well-known pastry chef in New York, who is the guy who invented the cronut, the donut croissant. And he's known as the Willy Wonka of baking, of pastries. So it seemed like a good pair up. And the last time I saw Bill Lumsden was in New York about 3 weeks before COVID really hit. And the three of us, Dominic Ansel, myself and Bill, were brainstorming and messing around with him about ideas for these cakes and cocktail and such like combinations. So that was quite a creative day as well. It's good fun. Do you get a kind of almondy note as well? Sometimes I get almost like almond flour on cake.
Yeah.
Something like that. Marzipan, a little bit distant marzipan notes.
Some honey.
Honey for sure. Absolutely. So I've come round to the idea of the packaging now. It's certainly kind of, it's certainly not boring. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing, at least. We don't want it to be boring.
No, it's young and fresh, and I think it will attract a lot of young people
Yeah.
into the whiskey world.
I mean, it shouldn't really talk boring stuff about sales, but I just saw a report came through for Cake, and it's of all the, if you compare it to all the private editions, this isn't a private edition, obviously, but it's the same price point, it's the same kind of availability. This sold way faster than any of the 10 years of private editions.
Mm-hmm.
So must be doing something right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's not an easy world to compare or to mix whiskies with cocktails. I started myself as a cocktail catering company, and I also am a big fan of single malt whiskies. And one of the first things I tried to do when I was working with cocktails was trying to make a very good one with whiskey. And after 20 or more trials of making a good cocktail, I never found anything that was worth it until I realized that the whiskey was the problem. Whiskey is such a distinctive character in a cocktail that when you use an average or a bad whiskey, you'll never get a good result out of it. So when I started experimenting with better whiskies, the results were getting better and better. So
well, watch this space. Watch this space, because we've got a project I can't really talk about yet, but there's something coming for Glenmorangie later this year that will be very much trying to answer that same question that you had there, is about how to use a single malt that will taste delicious as itself, of course, but will actually work when you start playing with it, you know.
Because a lot of whiskey fans are not open-minded enough, I think, to enjoy the possibility to make something else out of it. Which
true, and I think you and I probably come from the same place where, you know, of course, nothing will really ever come close to me to tasting a single malt as it's meant to be in a glass, and really when you have that aha, that moment of wow. But that doesn't mean that you can't also derive great pleasure from creating interesting things from those cocktails, in the same way as, you know, eating a piece of fruit or eating a green pea fresh off the pod in the garden. Nothing ever is going to taste pea-wise as good as that pea. It doesn't stop you cooking with peas. You know, it's the same sort of thing. You know, there's just variety is the spice of life.
Yeah, but you can always use Irish whiskey to cook or to make cocktails.
But no, I mean, Irish whiskey's for when you need to clean the windows. Whoops!
The cocktail sauce.
Irish whiskey's for when somebody asks for a vodka cocktail.
A bad one.
Oh dear, I'm going to get myself in big trouble. All said in jest, all said in jest. Anyway, moving swiftly on to the star of the show, I suspect, at least in terms of, I haven't tasted it, I'm not going to taste it, but it's probably the one that people were looking forward to a lot, the rarity here. Single port cask. And yes, it is a single port cask because this has not been finished, I believe. This was fully matured in a tawny port cask, which is quite unusual for Glenmorangie as well. You know, things like the Quinta Ruban were using ruby port casks, but this is one of 796 bottles ever produced from a single tawny port pipe, cask number 6678, distilled in 89. Bottled in 2005, non-chill filtered as a 15-year-old single malt. And distillery manager signature, Dr. Bill Lumsden on there. It's a 75 CL bottle, which is interesting. That I'm not sure what market that would have been when it said 75 CL. I thought Europe had gone to 70 CL by that point. The US would say 750 ml, so I don't know where that was for sale. Maybe it was.
Yep. It's not mentioned on the bottle or the card, so
it's a bit of a mystery.
Yeah.
The 75 CL thing, but it may well have been just at the distillery. It may have been at the distillery shop originally, and we were maybe just trying to, I don't know, use up. Who knows why it said 75 CL. But lucky people, enjoy. So why don't you tell me what you taste with this one? How about that? Oh. So pour yourself a glass and tell me what you get. I've read through the tasting notes and I thought it would be fun not to put them up, actually. I'll make you guys do a little bit of work. Bjorn has the tasting notes there, so he can reveal as much as he likes over the course of this, but have a nose and a taste to see what you pick up in this.
Any thoughts of everybody?
Stunned silence.
Yes, that might be a good thing.
Right, maybe I'll have a go. I have to say I'm struggling to get a lot of the tastes that you guys have been mentioning. I'm new to this. I have the same issue with wine as well. When I do wine tastings, people say, "Oh, there should be a hint of this and a hint of that," and I frequently struggle to identify the taste. I usually know what people are on about, but I struggle to put a name on it. But with this one, the only thing that has come to mind for me, and it might be something very silly that I'm saying, but it's chocolate. I don't know why.
No. I think that was actually on the official tasting notes. So yeah,
yes,
no,
it is.
Trust your palate. And all I would say is that you're not alone by any means, particularly in the early years of getting into whiskey. It's very hard to pick these things out. And then what you just said, I think everybody would agree with this, that you might sometimes go, I know what that is. I can smell that. That's familiar, but you can't put it, you can't connect it to the flavor memory to put a name on it. That is all of us. So welcome to the club. Don't feel bad about it at all. That's the fun of, that's half the fun of it, to be honest. Persevere. And if you really want to kind of get into nosing and tasting more, one of the things that can help a bit is, you know, there's the Le Nez du Vin kit, but you can get the Nez de Whiskey kit. It's quite expensive, but it has loads of little vials of single aromas, and you can kind of do a fun sort of Friday night test blind, get your friend or wife or whoever to blind test you on the nose, on the single aromas, and over time you'll pick up and you'll remember what they are, and you can kind of train your flavor memory that way. Lumsden talks about it, that from a very young age he would get told off at the dinner table at home because whenever he was given a plate of food, he would pick it up and smell the whole thing before he started eating it. And I've seen him, you know, when I'm out for dinner with him in New York, and for example, he'll pick up his food, or he'll just pick something up if we're walking through like Italy, the big Italian kind of place in New York that's like a massive 3-story deli. Walking through there with him is a disaster zone. He picks everything up and is smelling it. The security guards are chasing him around after a while. But yeah, just wherever you go, you know, I know we're all in lockdown, but next time you get to go to a supermarket safely and you can safely take your mask off, nose everything, nose the fruit, smell it, think about what it smells of. That all helps. I don't have, by no means do I have the best palate and nose in the world, but I've been able to get it to a point where I can successfully so far pass the Glenmorangie Whiskey Creation Team nosing and tasting test to stay on the panel. So I definitely wouldn't say I've got the best palate in the world, but a little bit of work and you can, wherever you are genetically, you can improve for sure.
That's why I think to start with, that tasting notes are always interesting to learn what you might find in it. Like in this one, the tasting notes mention nuts and spices, and I can really understand why. They talk about ginger. That's harder for me to find in it. The other word, the kloof, kruidnagel in Dutch, is also mentioned. That's something I might smell in it, but don't taste in it. They also mention mint. That's also hard for me to find in this whiskey. And then always fruit, creamy vanilla, peach, chocolate, and vanilla ice cream. Those are.
I taste a lot of chocolate.
Yes.
Really.
Question, because obviously I'm not getting to taste it. When I saw single tawny port cask, I thought full maturation in port, and then the fact it's tawny port, I was just really worried that it would just be too much tannin, too much astringent, kind of drying, ripping the roof off your mouth, kind of, and taking the texture off your tongue, kind of thing. But clearly maybe not. But is there any sense of a spiciness in there? It doesn't sound like it.
It is spicy.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess it would be lessened by the fact it's a port pipe, so the surface area to volume ratio is quite significant there.
But I think your description of it slightly sort of splitting the palate and the tongue. Correct. I'm getting it.
Cool.
It's something that I could drink a bit of, but not a lot of.
Yeah.
I think after a second or a third sort of generous pouring or helping, I'd struggle.
Well, that's fortunate, since there were only ever 796 bottles made, right? But no, seriously, it's good to hear to hear your thoughts on this, and that's what I expected to hear. That kind of it's a powerful, but maybe not a sessionable Glenmorangie.
This bottle also specifically suggests to add a couple of water drops in it. That way you can experience a lot more fruits in it. They mention passion fruit, cherries, lime, honey, stuff like that. So that are fruits that you don't find much in descriptions of whiskies.
Yeah. So definitely try that. Add some water. 53.3% and port pipe, full maturation. Probably definitely needs some of that water. I've just realized that I have been really stupid, and the slides for Signet they've dropped off somewhere in my presentation. So we're going to have to wing this with the bottle. And well, I've got some props here. There's some. Let me take this off here now. So we have some props here. I actually have some chocolate malted barley right there. So we'll talk about that, and some regular barley there. So I'll talk about that too when it's time. There we go. Awesome. Ooh.
For me, at the finish at that port pipe cask is some indeed chocolate, but minty chocolate, something like eucalyptus as well.
I love that because Glenmorangie has a tendency sometimes to have that mintiness on the finish.
Yes, indeed.
Particularly when it's had an influence from red wines and most commonly port. So the Quinta Ruban has a mint chocolate, eucalyptusy kind of style to the end. So yeah, I hadn't thought about it with this, but it's really interesting to hear that a tawny port cask is also giving that kind of menthol mintiness on the finish.
But I think it's not that heavily port pipe, because it's not that porty. I think you really taste the Glenmorangie style still, and not only the heavy port.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, Tawny port is going to give you less of the red fruit notes, isn't it? I mean, I'm not a massive port expert, but it should give you less of those red fruit notes.
But I have to say, it's one of the best port finished whiskey I ever drank.
Nice. I may have to look out on one of these upcoming auctions, see if I can't snag one. I'll be probably bidding against most of you guys.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, really. But the chocolateness is very much present.
Brilliant.
It's not easy because we also finished our whiskey with port.
Aha.
Different, several times. But,
several times. It's with less result than this.
Fantastic.
I think most of the tasting notes mentioned on the bottle we have described. They even talked about eucalyptus and things like that. So I think we found them all.
Hey guys, you should come and work for us. I should be careful. If I say that again, Eddie will be in Edinburgh knocking on the door.
Yeah.
It also mentioned it starts with milk chocolate or softer chocolates, and the finish is more lingering, bitter dark chocolate. And I can relate to that.
I'm going to pretend I'm drinking the same thing by pouring a little bit of Kinto Ruban. Not really the same thing, but hey.
Heeft die vlag nog eens met? Voor mij nog hier uit hier, ben ik zeker.
So, how do people feel about moving on to Signet? I don't want to rush, but I want to be respectful of people's time as well. You tell me. Looks like I'm getting a nod from Lauren.
It's good.
Yep. Okay, so Signet. You know, this is a case of there's madness in our method, going right back to, again, some of Lumsden's earliest days with the company. I mentioned it earlier, but he basically had this idea in his mind of using chocolate malted barley, you know, this stuff, right back from when he was doing his PhD in fermentation science, and it was aware that it's been used in brewing for a long time. And it makes, as you know, a very distinctly different style of beer when you use any form of chocolate barley or chocolate malted barley. And think Guinness, basically. Guinness doesn't use chocolate malt; it uses chocolate barley. They don't malt the barley, but similar idea. He was also aware that it hadn't been done in the Scotch whisky industry, and probably for good reason. Very much like the kind of German beer laws, and I'm guessing there's pretty strict beer laws in Belgium too. The Scotch whisky laws are very strict. For single malt, we get to use water, barley, yeast, and that's it. If you use just chocolate malt, the very process of making the chocolate malt is going to caramelize your sugars and starches. It's going to destroy any enzymatic activity. So chocolate malt, water, and yeast is going to make, wallpaper paste stroke porridge. That's about it. It ain't going to make, you're not going to get really any fermentation happening. Brewers can get around that problem, as Bill says, by adding a bit of jungle juice, a bit of sugars, a bit of enzymatic starter, and away we go. Not legal in Scotland, so we can't do that. When I'm presenting to a US audience, I steal the term from US whiskey, which is a mash bill. I kind of describe it almost as if we were using a mash bill. So we're using regular Glenmorangie spec barley. This stuff's here to do the hard work. This stuff is going to make the alcohol that puts smiles on our faces. The freeloader, along for the ride, but creating the unusual flavor, is the chocolate malt. When we do that, because there's still, you know, a lot less fermentable substance in this mash bill, our yields drop. When we're using this chocolate malt mash bill, our yields at Glenmorangie drop by about 33%. Now, that is the answer, that explains the answer that Bill got when he first presented this idea as a young guy, as distillery manager. He presented it to the board of directors, and he was basically laughed out of the office and told to go back to Tain and, you know, keep making the whiskey and stop having silly ideas. But if you've met Bill, he has always been the Willy Wonka of whiskey, and he realized that he had been entrusted with a very large barrel buying budget, which he still is, you know, a massive budget for barrels. And there are places in budgets that big to hide line items. And so he went ahead and bought a bunch of chocolate malted barley in his barrel buying budget and took on a skeleton crew of the 16 men of Tain. And over Christmas one year in the early 90s, they ran the distillery for the first time on chocolate malt. They barreled the resulting new make spirit and kept their mouths shut about the whole project. Move forward, and he's done that a few times, move forward to more enlightened times with the ownership of Hennessy LVMH and the actual opposite pressures. Before it was, you know, where can we cut corners? Where can we do things cheaper? Now it's, here's a bunch of money. When are you going to make us the next world-beating, one-of-a-kind whiskey that everyone shouts about? You know, that's the pressure Bill's under. So Signet played right into the current, you know, era's thinking, thank God. So it saw the light of day. To complicate things a bit more, the final Signet in your bottle is not all whiskey made from that mash bill. That actually makes up one of maybe 3 or 4 component parts to the final whiskey. So let's go with 3. At the heart of Signet, the beating heart of it, is the whiskey made from this mash bill. That's what gives it that espresso coffee unique flavor profile. But by itself, when we taste it out of the cask, a bit like coffee sometimes, it can be a bit too astringent, maybe a bit one-dimensional. It's wonderful, it's unique, but it's not the fully balanced, rounded Glenmorangie. That's where, and I mentioned this already, 2 other component parts come into the rescue. First of all, the whiskey that is much more like Astar, that comes in. What have I done with my Astar? I'll put it somewhere. Anyway, whiskey much more like Astar. Younger, first fill designer oak casks. Again, the analogy with coffee. We've got our espresso. If your espresso was a little bit maybe bitter on the finish, of the taste, what could you do to it? Well, maybe you could add some cream or frothed steamed milk and make it into a cappuccino or a latte. That would round it off a bit, make it into something different. If it was still not quite right, the third thing you could do to your whiskey and also to your cappuccino at this point would be cappuccino, you could add a bit of brown sugar. The analogy there would be some stocks of pretty significantly old sherried Glenmorangie. Not all, but some of it dating right back to the 70s. There are smatterings of old 70s era sherry matured Glenmorangie. Stuff that we would never release by itself. It's a big sherry bomb, counter to the whole theory and ethos of finishing that we have, but and predating Bill, but perfect as part of the color spectrum to kind of build a painting together for the final Signet. And I liken it to adding a little bit of brown sugar to my cappuccino in the morning or something like that. So those component parts work to give you balance to the final Signet. I said 3 or 4 components, so I can't let that drop. The other component part that Bill has admitted to me about, and there's more that he won't tell anyone, but there's a component of virgin oak finished Glenmorangie in there too. Something, if you're a big Glenmorangie fan, you'll remember the old 15-year-old that was partly virgin American oak finished, and it was a bit more bourbon-like in there. Or if you've had a chance to try Atlanta, think a little bit like that. there's something a bit like that in there as well, just to beef it all up, I guess. So one of a kind, awesome whiskey. The only other thing I'd add is that if I'd never tasted Signet before and I was blind tasted on it, could I take it out of a lineup as part of the Glenmorangie family? I'm not sure, personally. It's really quite different. But there we go. Let's have a glass of Signet. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. So if you thought there was chocolate on the last one, wow, right? Now we're talking, it's like cocoa beans. It's like espresso beans coated in dark chocolate that you just eat, you know, and you shouldn't eat more than two or you start bouncing around the room. But it's that kind of thing going on.
It really reminds me of that. Sometimes when you buy a coffee, you get some of those coffee beans completely covered in dark chocolate. It's really the same taste.
Totally.
I think that comes to mind.
Yeah. Somebody else said on the port cask, single cask, that there was a spiciness to it. Again, even more spiciness here. One of the tasting notes for Signet is sizzling spices. Like Bill always imagines taking a bunch of spices and herbs, dried ones, and just getting a very hot skillet or frying pan and just putting the spices on top so they pop almost and they're kind of sizzling and smoking. That kind of idea of a spicy herbal note in there.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. Thank you to whoever has to go. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Sorry for going so long. It's, wow, 3 o'clock here almost. This is a whiskey that I personally, we talked about water earlier. You know, first of all, I'm never going to be the one to preach to you how to drink your whiskey. You drink it however makes you smile. That's the rule. That's the only rule. If it makes you smile, you're doing the right thing. But personally, I don't add water to Signet. I don't think it helps it. It kind of flattens it. And this is going to be, the next thing I'm going to say is probably going to shock a few people. The first time I realized that ice wasn't always bad was when Lumsden himself pretty much physically grabbed me by the collar at a bar and said, "Here, I don't want to hear any more bullshit from you about not drinking my Signet on a big ice cube. I've just ordered you a double Signet on a big ice cube. Try that and shut up." Were his words. And guess what? Of course, I was wrong and he was absolutely right. And if I do anything to my Signet other than just pour it in a glass and enjoy it, I would get one big ice ball or one big ice cube and pour a big hefty measure of Signet over the top. And it does something that most whiskies don't do. It kind of becomes a bit more mellow and a bit more nutty. So I think Signet by itself is that double is a cappuccino or with a double espresso shot in it. When you add ice, it becomes almost like hazelnuts notes in there, like a hazelnut latte or something. It's a different but delicious drink.
It's the one when you're doing the tasting at the house, they are actually going 3 times with water. They're adding 3 times water at the Signet.
Really?
You always got a different palate then.
I don't like it with water at all, personally.
Yeah, but they do it. So we have to smash David next time.
Yeah, well, any opportunity to smack him on the back of the head. Eddie, the lesson here is don't trust an Englishman.
I know.
You know, you can tell him I said that.
not even when he wears a kilt, you always see it.
Yeah, exactly. You know, Englishman in a kilt, you can see his frilly underpants sticking out the bottom, his petticoat. Sorry. I can say that because I'm actually about quarter English myself, so it's okay. I get it.
So it's you.
Yeah, it's terrible. I shouldn't have admitted that. There we go.
The whiskey reminds me of a whiskey I tasted not long ago, Vetterkern, 16 years. It was also with black malt.
Yes. I have a bottle of that somewhere. I just got one. Yeah.
But that's not the mixture with the white and the black. It's only the black, I think. No?
Well, they would have. I'm assuming that Vetterkern, they would have had to have used some regular barley in their mash bill. Just otherwise, I don't know how they would have got fermentation going really, unless they're doing something not above board, which I don't believe. I don't think they'd be doing. So I'm pretty sure that there'd have to be regular barley in there. The other reason is that when you mill chocolate malt, it just disintegrates into like it's like that bit in is it Raiders of the Lost Ark where everything just goes to ash. It's a bit like that. It just goes to very fine powder. So if you had 100% chocolate malt, not only would you not have any fermentation happening, but you add water and then it would set like concrete pretty much, I think. So I'm pretty sure they'd have to have a good amount of regular barley in there.
Yes, but the percentage of the black malt would be higher than this one because you could taste what you describe. It's much heavier. Yes, than this one. This is very elegant still, and that and you have the chocolate taste very pronounced. So it's I really like it.
Great, I'm glad. Yes, I tried the Vetterkern recently. That's all I'll say. I tried it recently.
All right.
Yes. Got to be ambassadorial and
right.
I tried it recently.
You better watch out because I think Bjorn is recording this.
I have to be careful. Yes. It was interesting to taste it for sure, but yes, the combination of the other components I think is what really makes Signet what it is. I've had the opportunity to taste the component parts of Signet, and yes, when you see them all together, you understand. Yeah. If anybody, I'm sure a few of you are big enough Glenmo fans, this won't be completely new news, but frustratingly, just about 6 months before pandemic, there was a limited edition. The first time ever we've done a limited edition Signet. I've been screaming, can we do some limited edition tweaks on Signet? That would be brilliant. I think everyone would love like a different take on Signet every now and then. Well, they finally did one, but it's only available in the airport in Seoul. In Seoul Incheon International Airport. And of course, now there's a pandemic. Nobody's going through Seoul Incheon International Airport. So it must just be sitting there. So I've been phoning Bill and saying, come on, Bill, you must have access to some of this stuff. Send me a bottle, It hasn't happened yet, but yeah, once you get traveling, if you happen to be at some point in the future connecting through Seoul, look out for and probably snap it up. The only ever limited edition Signet, where I think they've doubled up on the kind of espresso chocolatey notes. I think it's called Signet Mocha or something like that. I forget, but that was the limited edition. Yeah, cool. So, favorite of the evening? Anybody have a standout favorite?
I think for me it's the Signet. The
Signet?
Yeah.
18.
18? Yes.
For me, the 18-year-old. The fourth one.
Astor. For me, the Astor.
Astor. Cool.
For me, then the 89. Actually,
Wow. Well, it's reassuring to hear such a broad range of favorites. That means we're doing something right, I would say.
Yeah.
And for me, it was the Tacta.
Tacta, wow, cool. Yeah.
Yes,
so, David, now we can go through the Ardbeg tasting, or?
Well, you know what? If you guys would love to do an Ardbeg tasting, we can certainly, you know, Bjorn, if you want to talk about it, I'm up for it. You know, I don't want to.
You have to turn your table then. And,
well, I've got, what have I got here? Supernova. 19. What have I got here? A different. We could do a fun one for sure.
Yeah, but it might be very interesting. Who's up for an Ardbeg tasting? Put it in the chat, or.
When is the Ardbeg 25-year-old released in Belgium? I honestly don't know when that would be, but it's coming out over here in the States, you know, imminently. So I would think it would be the same, you know, in the next 30 hopefully. We've got Ardbeg. Is Ardbeg, Mickey's Pirate Ardbeg, is that out yet with you guys?
Oh, I saw something about it. I think you can get it in Belgium already.
It should be launching here in the next month or so. So that could be a fun one. If you guys can get hold of that, that could be fun too. That's a rye cask matured Ardbeg. So again, kind of following on from what we did with, it was actually part of the same secret project with Spios. We sent some of the barrels over to Ardbeg as well. At that point, so yeah. So no, if you'd have me back, I'd be interested for sure. That'd be fun.
Yeah, well, I'll talk to you about it.
Brilliant, love it.
I also seen from Glenmorangie, the Malaga Wood has come out, but it's already almost everywhere sold out. Is that a new pickup on the wood finishes of Glenmorangie, or was that a one-time deal?
That was already a one-time deal, the Malaga. Although there will be another one this year. I don't know what the story is, what the wood is yet, but there will be a limited edition Glenmorangie this year in that same what's it called, Barrel Reserve or something. Yep. I forget series. So there'll be that. There'll be, I know it's not much use to you guys, but if you get to travel later in June this year, there'll be a second. Oh, actually, I have to be careful about admitting to that. Oh, whatever, I've said it now. This is Cabell Estate, which came out for the Americas, 15-year-old first fill, all from barley from our fields around the house. There'll be a follow-up batch 2 to this coming out this year as well, so that should be fun.
Do you know if they're gonna make any more private editions also? Because I've seen they skipped a year now.
Yeah, no, I think the term private edition has probably been put to bed. I'm not certain, but I think the decision was after 10 years, let's just take a bit of time. I absolutely categorically can tell you that there will be plenty of exciting limited edition Glenmorangies. We're not stopping that.
Yeah.
So there will be liquids. Whether it's called private edition, probably not. There'll probably be some new range or series. I don't know yet what the plan is, but and obviously, you know, Cake was not officially part of the private edition. It just said limited edition, but you know, roughly the same availability. Similar kind of unusual cask story, similar price point. You can expect offerings at that price point and of that kind of availability and of that interest to continue from Glenmorangie. They're probably not going to be called private edition, though, I suspect.
Okay, nice to know.
Yeah. Indeed. Good question, for sure. Anything you guys would love to see from Glenmorangie? Anything that, you know, I could go and bend Dr. Lumsden's ear about?
Yes, actually, I have some.
Okay.
I would love to have, I think, a Glenmorangie in one of our Belgian beer barrels from the region of Brussels.
Okay.
Something like a Geuze or something. I think that would be very interesting as well.
Okay. I'm taking notes.
It all depends, actually, if the SWA approves it, of course.
Yeah, we'll cross that. We'll cross that bridge when it comes to it. Very much like Signet. Lumsden was dragged when we first were about to come out with Signet. Somebody leaked it to the SWA, and Bill was dragged up in front of them to explain himself, and obviously did a good enough job because we got it past them. They argued that chocolate malt was not traditional, and Bill said, "What, you think back in the day, over centuries, when all the distilleries were malting their own barley, they never burnt it by mistake and then used it anyway? Of course they bloody did." So it's traditional, and we're going to do it. Thanks, bye. But yeah, we can cross that bridge. We've got plenty of experiments going on that Bill's always said, you know, we've got, don't let the fact that it may not pass the SWA regulations stop us from experimenting. And he has yet to release a whiskey that is directly in contravention to any of those regulations. But he's always said, if there was a whiskey that spectacularly good, you know, he would consider risking it or, you know, having the fight if it was just that good. He just doesn't think yet that any of the experiments that are that wacky have come so good that he's worth having the battle, because you can only have that battle once. You know? But you never know, it might happen one day.
Yeah.
Do you have any ideas about working with special editions with finishes on Sauterne? Because I tasted just the commercial ones and I really liked it much more than other brands. Yeah.
You mean the Nectar d'Or?
Oui.
Yeah. So we have done a couple of very kind of high-end limited editions. We have in the past done Sauterne casks. This one here, Glenmorangie Pride 81. This is all Ikem cask, but you know, expensive, and 1,000 bottles produced. Other than that, good question. I don't know if we've thought of working with any one particular Sauterne producer to you know.
I thought you had some good connections still.
Oh yes, yeah, we do. I mean, we're owned by Hennessy, and our single largest shareholder also owns Ikem. Yes.
That's why, because the quality of the casks is really superior.
Yeah. We're kind of lucky anyway, though, because we're buying all of our Sauterne barrels, regardless of which producer they went to. We're buying them back through Tonnellerie Francois Frère, which are a pretty darn good cooperage. So we tend to be getting good quality casks anyway.
Yeah. But there are no ideas or plans of extra finishes with that kind of casks?
We have, with Sauterne, nothing I know of particularly. But in terms of finishing, you know, I've read from various people, various journalists and other whiskey makers that, you know, finishing is done. What's next? We would agree. What's next? There's plenty other things to be doing, but we would fundamentally disagree that finishing is done. There's plenty more to be done that's exciting and interesting, and we are doing it right now. Can't tell you exactly what, but I was on a call with Bill last week about something that should be a pretty interesting, probably a first in the whiskey world when it finally, if we get our skates on, this one might come out in 2024, 2025, something like that. So yeah, there are lots of things in the pipeline.
I'll be patient then.
But it's a good one. I've noted down the idea of almost single vineyard Sauterne Glenmorangie releases. I like that.
So would you be then the first distillery with the tequila casks or something?
I can pretty much tell you that won't happen.
Oh, okay.
Lumsden was asked recently in the last few months about his thoughts on tequila casks, and his response was, "Over my dead body." he says it's just going to be nasty, is his opinion. So I don't think that's likely to happen, and probably for a good reason too. But there we go. Okay. Who knows? Who knows? But at the same time, Bill's Bill. He might be saying that, and it just be cover for him doing it. Who knows? You never know. I don't think you'll see it from us.
But maybe in his secret room, he will experiment with that. Could be. If he's such a Willy Wonka like you told, maybe it could be.
Yeah, I think he's always kind of walking a tightrope where he doesn't want to just do things for shock value. He wants to be fairly sure that he's going to make a delicious whiskey, and from what he's experimented with so far, he's not impressed with tequila casks. It's probably the best way to put it. So I doubt it will ever happen.
Okay, thanks.
Lots of people have asked that question, so you never know. I mean, if enough people ask, it might make it more likely. Who knows?
I am out of questions for now. Are there any of the other participants who have questions for David?
When will we see you again in Scotland?
Oh man, yeah, your guess is as good as mine. I'm supposed to be in Inverness on the 10th of September, and for about a week before that, hopefully. But who knows? Who knows now? It's just.
I think the board in Scotland. The borders aren't open for a few months, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that's going in my personal favor is, believe it or not, I can't believe I'm saying this, even though the US isn't handling the vaccination program particularly well, it seems to be handling it better than most other places, actually. Yeah. And I'm actually getting my second and my final dose of Moderna on Wednesday. Mm. I had my first dose 3 weeks ago almost. So, I mean, things down here, I'm just outside of Dallas. Things are moving really fast.
Yeah. I hear that from a lot of people in the States. They're telling all those bad stories here about the States, but they are much quicker with the vaccination than
Texas
than we are here.
Texas got to 1 million people vaccinated like 2-3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And they're rolling through. They're opening on Wednesday. I'm going to the high school stadium down here. Looks like something that like a English Premiership League would have. It's massive. It's absolutely massive. They have converted it into a drive-through vaccination center, and you just you have to wear a t-shirt, roll the window down, and they stick you.
Yeah.
That's it.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
So they're trying to do. I think that one center is going to do something like can do 20 to 40,000 a day, something like that. So yeah, I never thought I'd say the Americans were more organized at something.
But they are. They seem to be.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. We'll see. Have to see how Scotland gets on. There is actually a vaccine. I was looking this up yesterday. There's a company that's making a vaccine that is apparently about to be approved, and it's like a walk from Glenmorangie's bottling hall. Our bottling centre is in Livingston at the Alba plant, and just down the road there's a vaccine company that's very likely to have a vaccine that's approved. So there'll be a factory in Scotland, and I think it's a single dose vaccine too. So if it's that might rapidly change things in Scotland. So who knows?
And as it's close to the bottling of Glenmorangie, they might mix something.
Well, maybe we'll do a holiday pack. One of those gift packs. Instead of getting a Glencairn, you get a little vial.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Single malt, single dose, yeah?
Yeah, single malt, single dose. You get to cheers your survival with a glass of Glenmorangie. Who knows? But no, I don't know. I mean, I'd love to think I could get to Glenmorangie in September.
Well,
things need to turn a corner fast if that's going to happen, doesn't it? Have you got any plans, Eddie, to get over, or anyone else?
Normally we are going something between September and November. Depends on. But last year we didn't make it. Normally we're there each year at the house.
Well, just to share this again, this is my last slide. This is a rather low res picture, but I wanted to just talk about how we're looking at the future, and I'm sure some of you know about this. This was supposed to launch last summer and obviously got delayed. But this is the Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, kind of secret skunk works operation center here, and next to our main still hall, which is here, this towering building is going to be an experimental center for Bill and his team to do all the funky, crazy stuff they've ever wanted to do without having to worry about disrupting the production line of distillate for core range. And over here on the left, this building that doesn't look so exciting is going to have all sorts of wacky fermentation apparatus, mills in there, all sorts of stuff. So we will be able to accelerate our experimentation, into a different league with this setup. And that is due to apparently open around about the 5th of September now.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll see what happens.
Well, still, when we were there in, I think it was November 19, it was still with wooden walls. We had the tour from Rachel, I think, or I'm not sure if it was Rachel or Annette. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I've had an opportunity with a hard hat on and everything to stand up here and look around, but it wasn't finished at all. It was still a building site. But quite interesting. It'll be you talk about the Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. It's not just all marketing fluff. We are spending money. We're serious about this.
Yeah, nice.
It's going to be fun. So if that happens, it might be a good reason to be
there. Yeah,
around about or just after. I wouldn't go right then because it'll be hard to give you any access because we're going to have, if it happens on plan, we'll have media there and such like, but a few weeks later would probably be a good time.
Yeah.
Cool.
That'd be great.
There you go. Cool.
It's also on my bucket list to go to the distillery and Glenmorangie house, but it might be for in a couple of years.
Well, Bjorn, let me know as soon as we think it can be practically arranged. I'm delighted to help you book that. And,
okay.
Ideally, I'd love to get over and show you around. Let's see if we can make that work.
Okay, that would be very nice.
Yeah, that'd be fun, right? Cool.
Are there any other questions for David? I think most people are through their questions.
I think they're out of questions.
Then it only rests me to thank you a lot for this tasting and all your work and effort to putting this together, and all the very colorful slices on the PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate it. No, thank you for having me. And I'd love to do an Ardbeg one. So we could do something fun there for sure.
You're going to hear me sure about that.
Yes. Brilliant. Cool. Well, cheers, everyone.
Thanks, Bjorn, and thanks, David, for the lovely presentation. And hope to see you in September then.
Cross fingers. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.